Listen, there is a moment Marcus has described exactly once, to exactly one person, and it is this. He is lying inside a tent in the Spruce Knob backcountry at 2 in the morning, flashlight in his hand, and something in the trees below camp is blinking his light back at him. 3 short pulses. A pause. 3 short pulses again. The same pattern he used hours earlier to find his way back from the creek. The flashlight in his hand is off. He has not pressed the button. He is certain of this because he is holding it so tightly that his knuckles have gone numb. He packed out before dawn. He has not camped alone since. He had arrived 2 days before that moment, on a Thursday afternoon in early November, at a trailhead in Pendleton County, West Virginia, that he had visited twice before, and considered one of the quieter sections of the Monongahela. The parking area was a gravel turnout off a county road, barely wider than his truck, and on that particular Thursday it held exactly one vehicle. His. The permit system confirmed no other backcountry permits had been issued for that zone that weekend. He had checked twice. Marcus was the kind of person who checked twice. He had been planning this trip since February, the way some people plan vacations to warm places. He kept a handwritten gear list in a yellow legal pad, updated every year, and by the time November came around he could pack his truck in under 40 minutes. Sleeping pad, 30-degree bag, 3-season tent, bear canister, water filter, 2 days of food, a small stove, a thermos he had owned for 9 years, a headlamp with fresh batteries, and a paperback novel he would not open until the second night. He had a system. He trusted his system. The trail register sat under a small wooden kiosk at the trailhead, one of those weathered structures with a shingled roof and a rusted latch on the door that held a pencil stub and a logbook thick with entries going back several seasons. Marcus signed in. Name, permit number, entry date, expected exit date, and flipped back through a few pages out of habit. Most entries were short. Good trail conditions. Some wet spots near the creek. Bear activity noted at the lower campsite. He almost missed it. An entry from 2 weeks prior, written in a narrow, deliberate hand. Beautiful sight up top. Good water at the creek. One note for solo hikers. Don't signal with your light in the lower drainage after dark. Learned that the hard way. You'll get an answer. Marcus read the first 2 sentences. He read the warning once, decided it meant a poacher working the drainage at night or possibly some wildlife responding to sudden light, and clipped the logbook shut. He shouldered his pack and started up the trail. The walk-in was 4.2 miles, gaining about 1,200 feet over the last 2 miles before the ridge opened up. He was at camp by 4 in the afternoon, which gave him a full hour of gray November light to set up the tent, secure the bear canister, and collect water from the creek drainage below the ridge. The tent stakes were a project in rocky soil. He used rocks to anchor the corners, the way he always did up here, and by the time he had the rain fly cinched down, he was breathing hard and satisfied, and the view off the ridge was exactly what he had needed since February. He made dinner sitting on a flat rock with the thermos balanced on his knee. Instant miso. Not because he liked it, but because it weighed nothing and the sodium helped at elevation. He watched the spruce canopy move in the wind below him, the trees dense and dark even in the last thin daylight. And he thought about nothing in particular, which was the point. He turned his headlamp on when the light dropped, made a careful walk to the bear canister to stow his cook kit, and climbed into the tent by 6:30. He read for an hour. The spruce made a low, sustained sound in the wind, almost oceanic. Under it, occasionally, he heard a slow, rhythmic tapping, a branch against another branch, hollow and patient. He noted it the way you note sounds you expect from a forested ridge in November, which is to say he noted it once and let it go. He was asleep by 8. The first night was completely quiet. No coyotes, which he remarked on briefly in the morning in the pocket journal he kept on trips. No canids, creek audible, wind steady. He did not note anything else because there was nothing to note. The second afternoon was where it started, though he did not understand that until later. He went to the creek mid-afternoon to refill his water bottles, following the slope down through the spruce to where a small tributary ran clear over flat rock. The light was low and amber at that hour, and he crouched beside the water and used his headlamp briefly to check the clarity before running it through the filter. 3 short blinks against the water surface, out of habit, the same check he always made. He filled both bottles, climbed back up to camp, and thought nothing of it. That evening, while he was heating water for dinner, he saw the light again. It appeared below the ridge, in the trees, the same general location he had noticed the night before. Moving slowly, not following any line he could associate with a trail, more like something being carried without intention of direction. He watched it for close to 2 minutes. It was higher on the slope than it had been the first night. He told himself the wind had shifted the gap in the canopy. He told himself there was a hunting camp he hadn't known about. He watched until it disappeared, then finished cooking. At some point after dinner, he was already inside the tent reading. He made a decision he would later describe as thoughtless. He unzipped the tent door a few inches, aimed his flashlight down the slope, and blinked it 3 times. Nothing. The slope was dark and still. He zipped the tent closed and went to sleep. He woke at 2 in the morning to a sound he could not immediately place. Not the wind, not the creek, which he could hear faintly to the east. Not the tent fabric. Something on the gravel outside. The small flat stones he had cleared away from the tent perimeter to make the ground level. A single footstep. Not a settling sound, not a branch falling, not an animal moving through leaves. One deliberate footstep on gravel, placed carefully, and then nothing. Marcus lay still. He did not reach for his headlamp. He did not move at all. He breathed slowly through his nose and listened to the darkness outside the thin nylon wall with the focused attention of someone who has spent enough nights in the backcountry to understand the difference between ordinary sounds and sounds that require absolute stillness. The tapping he had attributed to a branch all evening had stopped. The spruce canopy was still moving. He could hear it, high up. But below it, at ground level, the forest had gone quiet in the particular way forests go quiet when something in them has also stopped moving and is also listening. He held that stillness for a long time. The footstep did not repeat. Eventually, without fully deciding to, he slept. He woke at 2:11 a.m. by his watch, and he knew immediately that he had not been woken by a dream. The light was coming from the tree line below camp. 3 short pulses. A pause long enough to count to 4. 3 short pulses again. He watched it through the mesh inner wall of the tent. His eyes adjusted enough to the dark that the blinks registered clearly against the black of the spruce slope. The pattern was unhurried, deliberate, patient in a way that suggested it had been going on for some time before he opened his eyes. He looked down at the flashlight in his hand. He was gripping it the way people grip things in their sleep when something wakes them afraid. Knuckles tight, thumb near the button. He had not pressed the button. He was certain of this the way you are certain of very few things at 2 in the morning in the dark, which is to say he was more certain of it than he had ever been of almost anything. The flashlight was off. The light in the trees was not. He did not move for several minutes. The pattern came again. 3 pulses. Pause. 3 pulses. The same spacing he had used at the creek that afternoon, checking the water clarity. He had not thought about that spacing consciously when he blinked at the slope after dinner. It was just the rhythm his thumb produced without intention. The same rhythm it had produced at the water. The same rhythm it had produced a dozen times on a dozen other trips. Not a code, not a signal, just a habit. Something below him had been watching long enough to learn the habit. He turned his headlamp on. The slope was empty. No eye shine, no shape between the trees, no movement in the lower branches. The spruce stood the way spruce stands in a headlamp beam at 2 in the morning, which is dark and close and impenetrable past about 30 feet, and whatever had been down there had either moved behind the tree line or had never been where he thought it was. He held the light steady for a full minute. Nothing. He heard one footstep on the gravel to the left of the tent door. He turned the headlamp in that direction. Gravel. Rocky soil. The anchor stones he had placed along the tent perimeter. Nothing standing on them. Nothing near them. Nothing he could see. He held the light there until his arm got tired. Then he made a decision. He did not make it dramatically. He did not panic. He lay in his sleeping bag for approximately 4 minutes and ran through his options the way he ran through gear lists, methodically and without sentiment. Wait for dawn. 3.5 hours, and he did not know what would happen in 3.5 hours. Pack out now, 4.2 miles, known trail, headlamp with fresh batteries, temperature in the mid-20s, but he had the layers for it. And at the trailhead there was his truck with a working heater and a road back to a county highway. He started breaking down the tent at 2:19 a.m. He worked quietly, which meant slowly, which meant it took him twice as long as usual. He did not turn on his headlamp any more than he needed to. He packed the sleeping bag first, then the pad, then the tent poles, then the rain fly, rolling it cold and damp rather than shaking it out. The bear canister was already stowed correctly. He had been careful about that, as he was always careful about that. And he shouldered the pack at approximately 2:35 and clipped the hip belt without thinking about it, because his hands knew what to do, even when the rest of him was focused entirely on listening. The tapping began again when he was halfway down the first switchback. It was not behind him. It was not below him. It was at approximately the same elevation, moving through the spruce to his right, parallel to the trail, keeping pace. He stopped. The tapping stopped. He started again. The tapping started again. Same rhythm, same distance, somewhere in the dense spruce where his headlamp beam ended and the darkness began. He did not shine the light in that direction. He had already decided he would not shine the light in that direction. He walked. The trail was familiar enough that his feet found it without much help from the beam. He knew the switchbacks, knew the exposed route at the second turn, knew the place where the trail crossed a rocky drainage and the footing went uncertain for about 20 feet. He moved through all of it, and the tapping moved with him, patient and even, like something that was not in a hurry because it did not need to be. At the creek crossing, mile 2.5, the flat rock ford he had used on the way in, the tapping stopped. He crossed in 6 steps and stood on the far bank and listened. The creek ran over the rocks in the darkness, and the forest on both sides was quiet. No tapping, no footstep, nothing. He walked the last 1.5 miles without hearing anything except the trail under his boots and his own breathing. He reached the trailhead at 4:43 a.m. His truck was where he had left it. The gravel turnout was empty. He unlocked the truck, put the pack in the bed, got in the cab, and sat with the engine off for a moment before he started it. When the dome light came on, he could see his own hands on the steering wheel, and they were steadier than he expected. He sat in the parking lot until the sky behind the ridge went from black to a dark gray that was not quite light. Then he got out, walked to the trailhead kiosk, unlatched the rusted door, and took out the logbook. He read the full entry from 2 weeks prior. Beautiful sight up top. Good water at the creek. One note for solo hikers. Don't signal with your light in the lower drainage after dark. Learned that the hard way. You'll get an answer, and then it'll want to know where you are. He stood at the kiosk for a while with the logbook open. Then he turned back a page and read through the other recent entries until the light was good enough to see clearly. He photographed the page with his phone. He walked back to the trailhead and looked at the gravel, mostly out of habit, and found nothing unusual until he checked the area just outside where his tent had been. He knew the approximate position from the trail, and there, in a small depression of soil between two rocks, was a partial print. Barefoot, human-sized, facing the place where the tent had stood. No print facing away. He drove to the county highway and stopped at the first gas station he found when service returned. He bought bad coffee in a paper cup and sat in the parking lot until he felt like driving again. He checked the logbook photograph on his phone while he waited. He had captured the entry and the one directly below it. The next entry, written after his own sign-in. He had not noticed it at the trailhead in the gray light. The date was 2 days after he had left. The handwriting was different from the previous entry. It said only 4 words. Don't answer it either. He never found out who wrote it. He looked at the photograph for a long time in the gas station parking lot, and then he put his phone face down on the passenger seat and drove home. The photograph is still on his phone. He has looked at it many times. He has not looked at the logbook itself again because the logbook is still at the trailhead, and he has not been back to the trailhead, and he does not plan to go. He camps with a partner now, when he camps at all. He has not been back to that drainage. Some trips, the ones he used to take alone, he simply does not take anymore. His gear list in the yellow legal pad still gets updated every year. He just doesn't always go. Most people who end up in the wrong place in these mountains didn't choose the wrong place. They chose the wrong road, or the wrong cabin, or they read a welcome note and stopped 2 sentences before the part that mattered. The cabin had felt safe too at first. They almost always do. Della had rented the cabin for 5 days because she needed 5 days of silence, and because the listing described it as a fully restored 1940s farmhouse with a writing loft, mountain views, and no nearby neighbors, which in October in eastern Tennessee sounded like exactly the right kind of loneliness. She was an art teacher. She had a novel she had been starting and stopping for 3 years. She had a week off school and a car that needed a long drive, and she found the listing on a small regional rental platform she had never used before, paid the deposit the same night she found it, and did not read every line of the welcome note until it was too late to matter. The drive-in was 2-lane county road for 14 miles, and then a half-mile of gravel driveway that came out of the trees like a held breath releasing. The farmhouse was white, or had been, 2 stories, a covered porch running the full front length, a tin roof, a detached shed to the left, and the kind of settled permanence that comes from a building that has been standing in one place long enough to stop apologizing for it. Della parked, sat in the car for a moment listening to the engine cool, then got out and started unloading. She made 3 trips from the car to the porch. Overnight bag, laptop bag, a cardboard box of food she had packed herself because she did not know if there was a grocery store within reasonable distance, and she had not wanted to find out the hard way. There was a combination lockbox on the porch post with the key inside. The number was in her confirmation email. She got it on the second try. The inside was clean and well kept in the particular way of places that are cleaned between guests rather than lived in. Surfaces wiped, floors swept, a folded dish towel on the counter that had never been used, a wood stove in the main room with a basket of split hardwood beside it, a kitchen with a propane stove and a refrigerator that hummed steadily. Stairs going up to the loft, which had a slanted ceiling and a window facing the ridge and a small wooden desk that Della immediately decided was the best thing about the property. She found the welcome note under a small clay dish on the kitchen table. It was handwritten on cream-colored paper. 2 paragraphs, signed with initials she could not fully make out. It told her where the circuit breaker was, how to start the propane generator in the shed if the power went out, that the wood stove damper needed to be fully open before lighting, and that there was a propane heater in the loft closet for cold nights. The second paragraph said, "Please do not disturb the back room. It is currently undergoing restoration and is not part of the rental. We appreciate your understanding." Della read this, looked up from the note, and did a slow count of the doors she had already noticed. Front door, bathroom off the kitchen. 2 doors upstairs in the loft that she had not yet opened. And in the downstairs hallway between the kitchen and the staircase, 1 more door, closed, painted the same off-white as the walls, but not quite flush with the frame in a way she had registered without examining. She walked to it now and looked more carefully. The gap between the door and the frame had been painted over, not recently. The paint had bridged the crack in multiple layers, each one slightly different in shade, building up over years into a seal that was less a repair than an accumulation. She looked at the hinges. She looked at the frame. She found the nail heads, 4 of them, driven flush into the wood where the frame met the door, their edges slightly rounded from being painted over so many times they had nearly disappeared. This door had not opened in a very long time. She thought, water damage, structural issue, unsafe floor or ceiling, a liability problem the owner had sealed rather than fixed, which was the kind of practical rural decision she had no objection to. She made a note in her phone to ask about it when she got signal, and went upstairs to set up the desk. The loft was everything the listing had suggested. She put her laptop on the desk and her notebooks beside it, and her coffee thermos on the windowsill where she could reach it without breaking her train of thought. And she sat down and looked out at the ridge and felt the specific relief of a person who has successfully left. She went to the diner in the nearest town for dinner, 20 minutes down the county road, and ate soup and cornbread, and read 2 chapters of a novel she was not writing, and drove back in the dark with the radio on. The gravel driveway was longer in the dark than it had been in the afternoon. The farmhouse came out of the tree line with its porch light on, amber and warm, and she had left that light on herself when she left, and still it looked more welcoming than she expected. She found the guest book on the kitchen counter when she was washing her dinner dishes. She had missed it on the first pass, pushed back against the wall behind the dish rack. A standard composition notebook, black and white cover, the word "Guests" written on the front in marker. She brought it to the main room, got the wood stove going, and read it from the beginning. Most entries were short. Great views, loved the loft, saw a deer from the porch. Very quiet, exactly what we needed. The book went back to 2011, maybe 8 or 9 entries a year. Handwriting changing the way handwriting changes when many different people touch the same pen. She was 2/3 of the way through when she found the entry she would come back to. Arrived Friday, left Sunday, would have stayed longer, but the floors make noise at night. Just the pipes, probably. A little tip if you're a light sleeper. The radio in the kitchen helps. Sleep with it on low. The floor sounds are just the pipes. It was signed with initials only. No date beyond the year. Della read it twice and smiled faintly. Old farmhouses. Of course. She was almost to the end of the book when she heard it. She had been sitting still for close to an hour, the fire settling in the stove, the propane heater in the loft doing its low work, the refrigerator running in the kitchen. She knew the sounds of the house by then. She was cataloging them the way a person does when they intend to sleep somewhere unfamiliar. 3 knocks. Slow, evenly spaced, with the patience of something that was not concerned about being heard. She looked at the floor. They had come from below her, clearly below, not from the wall, not from the stove, not from the refrigerator, not from any of the sounds she had already assigned a location. Below the floorboards of the main room, the crawlspace. She sat without moving for a full minute. Then, a rational list. Old farmhouses had crawlspaces. Crawlspaces had animals. Raccoons, opossums, groundhogs. She had grown up in a house with a groundhog under the back porch, and she knew exactly what an animal in a confined space sounded like against floorboards. 3 even knocks was unusual patterning for an animal, but stress and confinement did strange things to animal behavior, and the alternative explanations were not ones she was interested in entertaining at 9:30 at night alone, in a house 14 miles from the nearest town. She went back to the guestbook and finished reading. She climbed the stairs to the loft with the guestbook tucked under her arm, sat at the desk, and opened to a fresh page in her notebook. She started writing. The propane heater ticked. The ridge beyond the window was black and complete. She wrote for almost an hour without stopping, which was longer than she had written at one sitting in months, and she was thinking about going to bed when the knocking came again. 3 knocks. Patient, evenly spaced, from below her, directly below her, below the loft floor. She set down her pen. The loft was on the 2nd floor. Below the loft floor was the kitchen ceiling, and below the kitchen ceiling was the kitchen, and below the kitchen floor was the crawlspace. There were no pipes directly under the loft. She had looked at the circuit breaker location when she first read the welcome note. It was in the utility closet off the kitchen, not under the loft. There was no plumbing under this section of the floor. Just the crawlspace, and the dirt, and whatever was in it. She sat at the desk with her hand flat on the notebook and listened to the house go quiet around the place where the sound had been. And she did not knock back, and she did not go downstairs, and she did not open her laptop to check if the property had a Wi-Fi signal because she already knew it did not. She sat very still and waited to find out if it would happen again. She waited 20 minutes at the desk before she moved. The knocking did not come again. The loft settled back into its ordinary sounds. The propane heater, the wind finding the edge of the tin roof, the refrigerator cycling on and off 2 floors below. Della sat with her hand still flat on the notebook and counted the sounds methodically, the way she had been counting them all evening, assigning each one a location and a cause. She was good at this. She was a practical person. She had driven 14 miles down a county road alone to spend 5 days in a house she had never seen because she trusted her own judgment about what she needed. And her judgment had been correct about the desk and the ridge view and the wood stove, and she intended for it to be correct about the crawl space too. Animal, she told herself. Confined and stressed and active at night, which was normal animal behavior. 3 even knocks was unusual, but floors and joists did strange things to sound. A single animal movement could travel through old lumber in ways that had nothing to do with where the animal actually was. She went to bed. She slept in the smaller of the 2 loft rooms, the one with the window facing away from the ridge, and she slept adequately, which is to say she woke twice and lay listening and heard nothing and went back under both times. In the morning, the farmhouse was full of gray light and the smell of the previous night's fire, and she felt slightly embarrassed about sitting frozen at her desk for 20 minutes over a groundhog. She spent the morning writing. Good hours, productive in the particular way that happens when there is nothing else to do and nowhere else to be. She broke at noon, made coffee on the propane stove, and took it to the porch. The ridge was clear in the thin November sun. A crow moved through the tree line and disappeared. In the afternoon, she decided to look at the crawlspace access. She told herself it was practical. If she knew what was in there, she would stop noticing the sounds. She had found the access panel the night before without looking for it. A wooden panel set flush into the utility closet floor, about 2 feet by 3 feet, with a simple hook and eye latch on the inside. She had noticed it when she was checking the circuit breaker location and had not thought about it since. She took the broom from the kitchen closet. She crouched in the utility closet, set the broom handle against the panel latch, and worked it up slowly. The panel lifted on the second try. She held her phone light into the gap and looked. Dirt floor. Old insulation batting stapled between the joists overhead, some of it sagging. 2 pipes running parallel to the foundation wall, one copper, one plastic, both old. The space was perhaps 3 feet high at the center and tapered toward the foundation. It smelled like cold earth and dry rot and the particular mineral stillness of places that never get warm. She held the light steady and looked along the full length of the space she could see. No animal, no scat, no tracks in the dirt, no disturbance in the insulation. She lowered the panel and reset the latch, hook into the eye, and went back to the kitchen to wash her hands. That should have been the end of it. She was at the desk by 3, writing again, less productively than the morning, but productively enough. Around 6, she heard the knocking. 3 slow knocks from below the loft floor. Identical spacing, identical patience. She sat with her pen in the air and counted them. Then she knocked back. She did not plan to. Her knuckles were on the desk and the knock was out of her before she finished deciding. One sharp rap against the wood, and then she froze with the specific horror of someone who has just made an irreversible, small decision. The loft was completely silent. One knock came back from below, same weight, same tone, same wood. She set the pen down very carefully. She said quietly to the floor, "Hello?" 3 slow knocks. She stood up from the desk. She did not do it quickly. She did it the way you move when some part of your body understands something your mind is still catching up to, which is slowly and with great attention to every surface underfoot. She picked up her phone. She picked up her car keys. She put both in her jacket pocket and went downstairs without making a decision to go downstairs, just going, 1 foot and then the next. In the utility closet, she crouched in front of the crawlspace panel. The hook latch was facing right. She had latched it to the left. She was certain of this the way she was certain of very few things. She had reset it with her right hand, hook going into the eye from the left, and she had watched herself do it because she was being careful, because she was a careful person. The hook was now facing right, pointing toward the wall, toward the direction that would mean the latch had been operated from below. She stood up. She did not open the panel. She did not touch the panel. She stood in the utility closet for a moment with the phone in her hand and the car keys in her other hand, and she thought about the 14 miles to the nearest town and the half-mile of gravel driveway, and the fact that the road out was a 2-lane county road with no shoulder, and she had driven it in the dark once already, and she knew she could do it again. She was in her car at 2:07 a.m. with the heat running, and her overnight bag in the back seat and her laptop bag on the passenger seat. She had packed in 11 minutes. She had not rushed. She had simply moved through the cabin, collecting her things with the economy of someone who had already made the decision and was now executing it. And the only moment she hesitated was at the front door, which she locked behind her out of habit, and then stood on the porch for a second looking at the gravel drive going into the trees. She drove to the county road and parked on the shoulder, and sat with the heater on until the sky started going pale. Then she drove back. The farmhouse in early daylight looked like a farmhouse. That was the thing about it afterward. It looked completely correct. The porch light she had left on was still burning. The tin roof was damp with condensation. A crow was doing something in the yard near the detached shed. She went inside and walked through every room, and nothing was disturbed, nothing was moved, nothing was different in any way she could identify. The utility closet panel was closed. She did not check the latch position. She retrieved the rest of her bags. Before she left, she checked the guest book one more time. An impulse she couldn't explain afterward, and found what she had not noticed the night before. Between the last written entry and the back cover, a page had been removed. Not torn. The separation was too clean for tearing. The stub along the binding was narrow and even, the kind of line left when someone takes their time. She photographed everything. The nailed door in the hallway, the guest book binding with its narrow stub, the welcome note with its second paragraph. 4 days later, she sent a message to the property owner through the rental platform. The response came after another 4 days, a single line in plain text. The back room has been closed since 1987. We don't discuss why. She looked up the property records for that county that week. She found a notation from 1989 referencing structural remediation following an incident. The incident was not described. The record gave no further detail, and she did not find any follow-up documentation. And after 2 more hours of searching, she closed the browser and did not open it again. She checks every room now before she puts her bags down. Every rental, every hotel, every time. She opens every door that will open and notes every door that will not. She has not rented a remote cabin since that October. She probably won't. It's not a rule she made for herself. It's just a preference that hardened into fact without her deciding it. The way some experiences don't leave a lesson so much as they leave a shape. And the shape of that one is, know every room you're sleeping near. She never found out what the incident was. She decided, after a while, that this was probably fine. Most people who ended up on the wrong road in these mountains didn't know it was the wrong road until they'd been on it long enough that turning around was more complicated than continuing. Rita had taken roads like that her whole life. She just hadn't taken that one before. Rita was already 40 minutes behind schedule when she pulled into the gas station, which meant she was in the particular mental state of someone who is simultaneously trying to make up time and pretending they are not. She had a job interview in Asheville at 2 o'clock, and it was 20 past 10, and the GPS on her phone had just informed her, in its flat, unconcerned voice, that there was an accident on the main highway that would add 53 minutes to her route. She stood beside the pump in the thin November sun and looked at her phone and did the math and did not like the answer. The station was a small operation at a crossroads in Haywood County, North Carolina. 2 pumps, a cinder block building, a hand-painted sign advertising night crawlers and propane refills. An older man came out to lean against the doorframe while she was pumping, not in an intrusive way, just the way people at small rural stations sometimes stand in their doorways in the morning because there is no particular reason not to. She asked him about the closure. He nodded like he had already been expecting the question, said there was a logging road that came out right on 64, cut off a good stretch of the highway detour, probably saved 40 minutes if you didn't dawdle. He described the turn, a gravel road about 2 miles up on the right, past a rusted gate that was always open, the road itself about 7 miles through to the highway. Good gravel, he said. Passable. He told her to stay on the main gravel. He said it once, and then, while she was putting her card back in her wallet, he said it again. Don't take any of the side tracks. Stay on the main gravel, and it comes right out. She thanked him and got in the car. She found the turn where he said it would be. The gate was open, as advertised. A rusted cattle gate swung back against the fence line, a chain hanging loose from the post. The gravel road began just beyond it, single lane, reasonably maintained, running into a corridor of second-growth hardwood that had gone gray and bare with November. She checked the time, 10:34, and turned in. The first mile was easy. The road was level, and the gravel was packed, and her sedan handled it without complaint. The hardwoods on either side were close, but not oppressive. The sky visible in a thin strip above the road. Flat white cloud cover that gave the light an even quality that made distances hard to judge. She had the radio on, something with a steady beat, and she was doing the math again. If this really did cut 40 minutes, she would arrive with 20 to spare, which was enough time to find parking and check her lipstick in the rearview mirror, which was all she needed. At about the 1.5 mile mark, the road began to climb. Not steeply, but persistently, the kind of grade that builds on itself. And the hardwoods on the left gave way to a slope that dropped away more sharply than she expected. No guardrail. The shoulder was maybe 8 inches of gravel before the edge, and she moved her car to the right and kept it there. The fog came down at the 2-mile mark. Not dramatically, it didn't roll in like something in a film. It simply arrived, the way valley fog arrives in the mountains, seeping down from the ridge above until the visibility softened and then shortened and then settled at a range of maybe 60 feet, beyond which the road dissolved into gray. She turned the headlights on and slowed to a pace that let her see the gravel surface clearly. She passed the farmhouse at mile 2.3. 2 stories, set back from the road on the right. White paint gone the color of old cream. One upstairs window lit from inside with a warm yellow light. An old property, steep-roofed, surrounded by bare trees that held it at a slight distance from the road. She noticed it the way you notice landmarks on unfamiliar roads. Registered it, gave it a location in her mental map of the route, moved on. At 4.6 miles by her odometer, the road curved through a hairpin turn with a metal signpost on the outside edge. The sign itself had been removed, just the post remaining, the bolt holes empty, the post slightly leaned by weather. She noted it. Landmarks. She was building a map. She was close to the end, according to the attendant. 7 miles total. She was past the halfway point. She kept driving. The fog thickened slightly as the road climbed, then thinned again as it leveled. She could hear the engine working steadily. The radio had gone to static somewhere in the 2nd mile, and she had turned it off rather than listen to the hiss. The silence in the car felt large without it, the kind of large that a person fills by thinking too much, so she focused on the road and the gravel and the math. She passed the farmhouse again at mile 6.1. Same white paint, same bare trees at the same angles, same upstairs window with the same warm yellow light. She slowed to a stop in the middle of the road because there was nowhere to pull over. She sat and looked at it, the window, the light inside it, which was the specific warm yellow of an incandescent bulb left on in a room where no one was currently sitting. The angle of the building relative to the road, the steep roof, the way the trees held it back from the road at the same remove. There were 2 possible explanations, and she ran through them in order. First, 2 similar farmhouses on the same road, which was not impossible in old Appalachian counties where families built on family land in the same style across generations. Second, she had somehow turned around without registering it, which the road's narrowness made implausible but not technically impossible. There had been 1 or 2 wider spots in the gravel. She checked her odometer. She had driven 6.1 miles since the gate. She looked at the house for another moment and then drove on, because the road was too narrow to turn around on, and the drop on the left side was real, and she had a 2 o'clock interview in Asheville. At mile 8.4, she passed the hairpin turn with the empty signpost. She recognized it immediately. The lean of the post, the bolt holes, the way it sat on the outside of the curve. She had passed this turn before, at mile 4.6. She was now at mile 8.4, and she was passing it again, and her odometer did not lie, and she had not turned around. She pulled as far right as the shoulder allowed, and stopped the car and turned off the engine. The silence was immediate and complete. No wind in the bare trees, no creek sound. She had expected a creek. The road had paralleled a drainage for part of its length, but the water sound was gone. No birds. The fog sat around the car in all directions, soft and neutral, and 60 feet out in every direction the road simply ceased to exist. She sat in the silence and breathed. Then, from behind her on the road, from somewhere in the 60 feet of fog between her car and wherever the road went when it left her sight, she heard an engine. Idling. The particular low throb of an older vehicle sitting in one place. She heard it for perhaps 10 seconds. Then it went quiet. She put her hand on her key in the ignition and did not turn it yet. She looked in her rearview mirror at the road behind her, which was gravel and fog and nothing else, and she listened to the silence where the engine had been and felt, for the first time since she had turned off the county road, that staying still was not the right choice. She started the car. She did not pull out quickly. The drop on her left was real, and the fog was real, and panic on a one-lane mountain road with no guardrail was a faster way to end the day than whatever was behind her in the gray. She eased back onto the gravel and drove forward at the same careful pace she had been keeping. Headlights on, hands at 10 and 2, and she did not look in the rearview mirror more than she needed to. The farmhouse appeared at mile 10.2. She noted the odometer reading the same way she had been noting everything, steadily, practically, with the part of her mind that was still running the situation like a problem to be solved. Third time, same window, same light. The light was off. She looked at the window as she passed. Dark glass. Whatever lamp had been burning in that room had been turned off, or had gone out, or had never existed in the way she had been perceiving it, and she did not slow down this time. She kept her eyes on the gravel and the 60 feet of road her headlights could reach, and she drove. The hairpin turn with the empty signpost appeared at mile 11.8. She did not stop. She took the curve at a careful speed, felt the gravel hold under her tires on the outside edge, and came out of it on a brief straightaway that climbed gently through the thinning fog. At mile 12.4, the fog broke. Not all at once. It thinned at the top of a small rise, and then she was above it, the road descending ahead of her through clearer air, the bare treetops visible on both sides, the flat white sky opening up overhead. She could see maybe 200 feet of road ahead of her, and it looked like a road should look, which was the first time in a long while that anything had looked the way it should. She came to the intersection at mile 12.9. A gravel T, her road meeting a county road that ran left and right, a green road sign on a metal post at the corner. She stopped and looked at it. County Road. She turned right because right felt like the correct direction for south, which was where Asheville was, and a quarter mile later she came out onto Highway 64 and the solid yellow center line and the speed limit sign and a gas station on the right side with fluorescent lights that looked like civilization had been waiting for her. She pulled into the gas station and stopped. She checked the time. She had turned onto the logging road at 10:34. It was now 6:47 in the evening. She sat in the car and looked at the number on the clock and then looked at it again. She called the interview contact from the parking lot and said she had gotten lost on a back road and was deeply sorry and could they reschedule. and the woman on the phone was gracious about it in the specific way that people are gracious when they have decided something about you but are too professional to say it. Rita did not get the job. She found out 2 weeks later by email. She drove the rest of the way to Asheville on the highway. At the first red light, a truck pulled up behind her. Old model, rusted cab, the kind of truck that had been someone's work vehicle for 20 years and was now on its third or fourth owner. No headlights. She could see the truck clearly in her rearview mirror, the shape of it, the height of the cab, and there were no headlights burning. She could not see the driver. When the light changed, she accelerated to the speed limit and watched the mirror, and the truck did not follow her through the intersection. She checked into a motel that night and ate a sandwich from a gas station, and sat on the edge of the bed in her interview clothes, and checked her odometer against the mileage she had noted when she left the County Road gas station that morning. The logging road by her odometer was 16.2 miles long. She had not stopped for more than a few minutes. She had not turned around. The road was physically too narrow to turn around on without going off the shoulder, which she had not done. 16.2 miles on a road that the attendant had said was 7. She drove the route the following morning on the highway, looking for the turnoff. The county road intersection she had used to reach 64 was there. She found it on her second pass, a gravel T coming out of the trees at the exact location she remembered. She turned in and drove to where the logging road should have intersected it. There was no logging road. Just county road, curving away to the left through second-growth hardwood, no intersecting gravel, no gate, no turnoff. She drove the county road for 2 miles in each direction and found nothing. She went back to the Crossroads gas station where she had started. The building was there. The 2 pumps were there. The hand-painted sign advertising night crawlers and propane refills was there. The man who had given her directions was not there, and the station appeared to be closed, which she told herself was simply because it was a Sunday morning, and some small rural stations kept irregular hours. She wrote the station's approximate location in her phone notes. 2 weeks later, she looked up the County Road GIS data, which is publicly available in most North Carolina counties if you know where to find it. She found the county road, she found the highway, she found the T intersection she had come out of. The logging road was listed as decommissioned, closed since 2003. No current maintenance, no public access. She looked at that entry for a while. She had been on that road in November of that year. She had driven 16.2 miles of it. She had passed the same farmhouse 3 times and the same signpost twice. And she had heard an engine idling in the fog behind her. And she had come out onto the highway at 6:47 in the evening, after turning in at 10:34 in the morning. She went back to the Crossroads one more time the following spring to look at the gas station again. The building that she remembered as a gas station was operating as a tire shop. It had the look of a business that had been a tire shop for some time. There was no signage about night crawlers or propane. She went inside and asked the man at the counter how long the shop had been there, and he said his family had owned that building since 1987, and it had been a tire shop the whole time, far as he knew. She drives Highway 64 when she goes through that county. It adds time, but it's a good road, straight and well-maintained, and she knows where it goes and where it comes out. She has looked for the logging road turnoff twice since, once in daylight and once in the early evening, and she has not found it either time. She's not entirely sure she would recognize the gate now, or the attendant's face, or the exact quality of the fog at mile 2 when the visibility softened and shortened and the world contracted to 60 feet of gravel in every direction. She's not sure she wants to. Some of these accounts came from strangers who wandered into places they had no history with, no connection to, no reason to trust. This next one is different. This one happened to a man on land his family had worked for 4 generations. On a morning he had repeated dozens of times. In a hollow he had walked since he was old enough to carry a rifle. The land knew him. He had always assumed that meant he knew the land. He had never thought about what else might know it too. Dale had been a district ranger with the Forest Service for 24 years when the assessment happened, which meant he had spent 24 years developing the specific professional temperament that comes from working alone in large wild places without losing your composure. He had found lost hikers and recovered the ones who couldn't be found. He had worked storm damage in the dark, alone, with a radio that didn't reach and a flashlight going yellow in the cold. He had encountered bears at close range more times than he bothered counting, and had learned to read the difference between a bear that was curious and a bear that had made a decision. He did not scare easily. He did not scare at all, as a general rule. He was precise, methodical, and skeptical by professional training. And when he told his nephew the story, years after retiring, he prefaced it by saying that he had gone back and forth for a long time about whether there was a rational explanation he had simply failed to identify. He said he had mostly stopped believing that. The storm had come through the previous week, a late-season system that had dropped 8 inches of rain in 36 hours and taken down timber on several trail segments in the district. Dale had been working the damage assessments in order of trail priority, and the closed segment, a 3.4-mile stretch on a high ridge in the George Washington National Forest in Virginia, was the last one on his list. The segment had been officially closed for 3 weeks, pending assessment. No permits issued, no personnel assigned. He had checked both before driving out. He arrived at the lower trailhead gate at 8 in the morning on a Tuesday in November. The gate was a standard Forest Service green steel barrier across the gravel access road, padlocked, with a closure sign wired to the crossbar. He logged his start time in his field notebook, unlocked the gate, drove through, relocked it behind him, and parked at the small gravel turnout inside the closure. He shouldered his assessment pack, notebook, measuring tape, camera, radio, first aid kit, rain gear, water, lunch, the standard load, and signed himself in at the trail register kiosk. He checked the register before heading out as he always did. The last entry before the closure date was from a day hiker 3.5 weeks prior, a couple from Charlottesville. Positive note, good trail conditions. No entries after the closure date. He verified the register date against his phone and clipped the register box closed and started up the trail. The storm had been thorough. Within the first quarter mile, he had 4 blowdowns to document: 2 hemlocks and 2 red oaks, root balls pulled clean, the exposed soil still dark and raw. He measured, photographed, noted the tread impact, marked the locations in his notebook with estimated crew time for clearing. This was the rhythm of assessment work. Stop, measure, photograph, note, move, repeat. It had a satisfying mechanical quality that he appreciated, the way precise work in a physical space could make 2 hours feel like 20 minutes. The trail climbed steadily through mixed forest, the ridge visible above through the bare canopy. The fire tower at the far end just barely distinguishable on clear days but invisible today under the flat cloud cover. He made his notes and kept moving. The radio worked adequately below the ridgeline, patchy but functional. He had called his position in to dispatch at the trailhead and would call again at the Midpoint Creek crossing and at the upper register before heading back. At mile 1.2 he stopped. 3 short whistle blasts from somewhere ahead. Up trail. Maybe a quarter mile, maybe a little more. The sound moving through the bare November forest with the specific clarity that cold, damp air gives to high-pitched sounds. He stood still with his hand on his radio and listened to the silence that followed. 3 blasts was the international distress signal. Every backcountry user knew it. Every ranger knew it. He knew it the way he knew his own address. Reflexively, completely, without having to think about what it meant. He keyed his radio and called dispatch. Poor reception this far up the trail, but he got partial confirmation, enough to convey his situation, enough to hear that no permits had been issued for this segment. No personnel were assigned to this trail today. He documented the time in his field notebook, 10:14 a.m. He noted the number of blasts and the approximate direction and started forward, because that was the correct protocol, and Dale followed correct protocol the way some people follow religion. He covered the quarter-mile in a few minutes, moving carefully around the storm debris, and reached a wider section of trail where the canopy opened slightly and the sightlines extended maybe 40 feet in each direction. He stopped and took out his own whistle and blew 3 blasts. The response came immediately. 3 blasts, clear and close, from a direction slightly up trail and to the right. He moved toward it. The ground here was wet and soft from the storm, the kind of soil that held a boot print, and he looked at the trail surface as he moved. Nothing. No prints but his own, and the shallow ghost impressions of whoever had last hiked this trail 3.5 weeks ago, long since softened by rain into suggestion rather than fact. He reached the location the sound had come from. Nothing. No person, no equipment, no pack, no jacket, no dropped water bottle. The soft soil showed nothing. A large red oak had come down nearby in the storm, its root ball creating a shallow depression, and the soil around it was undisturbed in the way that soil is undisturbed when nothing has walked through it in at least a week. He stood in the middle of the empty trail and looked in all 4 directions, and then he documented it in his field notebook, because that was what you did, because documentation was what separated professional judgment from personal impression. He continued up the trail. The whistle sounded twice more over the next 40 minutes. Each time he stopped, marked the direction, moved toward it, found nothing. The second time, he noted that the sound appeared to originate from slightly farther up trail than he was. The third time, the direction was ambiguous. The ridge threw sound in a way that made precise locating difficult. At mile 1.8, he reached the creek crossing. The ford was a flat rock shelf over a tributary that ran fast after the storm, the water higher than usual, the crossing requiring some care. He crossed it and stood on the far bank and called his position to dispatch. Better reception here with the ridge behind him, and noted that he had heard distress signals 3 times without locating their source, and that he was continuing to the upper register in the fire tower. Then he heard the whistle again, behind him, down trail, from the direction of the lower trailhead, from the half-mile of trail he had just covered in 40 minutes. Clear, unhurried, 3 short blasts, from wherever he had started. He stood at the creek crossing and looked back down the trail, which curved and disappeared into the trees within 30 feet. He had walked that trail. He had covered every foot of it. The soft soil had shown him nothing. He turned and looked up, trail toward the fire tower. The tower sat on the ridge at the far end of the segment, a standard Forest Service structure, cab on 4 legs with an open metal staircase, the whole thing unpowered since a grid outage 6 weeks prior. At this distance, through the bare trees, it was barely visible. A gray vertical shape against the gray sky. The cab window reflected light. He stood at the creek crossing and looked at it. The light was flat and even, overcast, no direct sun to create a reflection off glass. The reflection in the tower window was warm, slightly amber, brief, there for perhaps 2 seconds, then gone. He documented it. The tower had been without power for 6 weeks. He stood at the creek crossing for longer than he would later admit. The reflection was gone. The tower cab was gray and still against the gray sky, the windows showing nothing now but cloud, the structure sitting on the ridge the way it had sat on that ridge for 40 years, functional and indifferent. He looked at it for a full minute, and then he wrote in his field notebook, 10:58 a.m. Possible light anomaly in tower cab window. Duration approx. 2 sec. No power to structure. Investigate on arrival. He wrote it in the same handwriting he used for blowdown measurements and drainage notes, and he kept moving, because that was the correct thing to do, and Dale did correct things. The whistle did not sound again on the climb to the tower. This was, in its own way, more unsettling than if it had. He had built a pattern in his mind over the previous 2 hours. 3 blasts, silence, movement, nothing. And the absence of the pattern on the final mile felt less like relief than like something holding its breath. The trail climbed steeply through the last half mile, switchbacking up the exposed ridge, and he worked through the storm debris methodically, documenting, and listened to the forest with the divided attention of someone who is doing 2 things at once and is fully committed to neither. The fire tower came into view fully at the top of the last switchback. It was a standard 60-foot structure, the 4 corner posts angled slightly outward, the metal staircase open on all sides with cable handrails, the cab at the top a small square room with windows on all 4 faces. The whole structure had been painted Forest Service brown some years back, and the paint had weathered to a color that was almost invisible against the November ridgeline. He had been to this tower a dozen times. He knew what it looked like. He walked to the base and looked up the staircase and saw nothing on any of the landings, nothing in the cab windows, nothing that should not be there. He walked around the base. The door, a standard metal door on the north face, hinged inward, with a hasp and padlock, was closed. He examined the padlock. It was the lock he had keyed himself at the start of the season, a heavy brass laminated model, and it was secured through the hasp with the shackle fully engaged. No sign of tampering. No scratches on the hasp, no fresh marks on the door frame. He checked the corner posts for any sign that someone had climbed the outside of the structure, which was possible but left marks, and found nothing. He took out his flashlight and shone it up through the open staircase into the cab above. The underside of the cab floor, the trap door that opened into the interior, closed. The structure was secure from the outside. He knocked on the door with the butt of his flashlight. 2 solid knocks, the standard practice for announcing entry before forcing a lock in a search situation. A habit so ingrained he did not consciously decide to do it. His hand just did it. 3 knocks came back from inside the tower. He stepped back from the door. He looked at the padlock. He looked at the door. He looked up the outside of the staircase at the underside of the cab. He took a slow breath through his nose and let it out and looked at the door again. The padlock was locked from outside. He was holding the key. The door opened inward. There was one entrance to this structure, and it was in front of him, secured, and he was the only person with a key to it, and something inside had knocked back in a pattern of 3. He stood in front of that door for what he later estimated was 4 or 5 minutes. He did not move. He ran through his options with the same methodical temperament he brought to everything, and found that his options were essentially 2. Force the lock, enter, and confront whatever was inside, or document and leave, which was not a retreat. He told his nephew this carefully, not a retreat. It was a professional judgment call about risk, resources, and the limits of a solo assessment. He was alone on a closed trail with no backup, limited radio contact, and no confirmation from dispatch that anyone knew his precise location. Forcing entry into an enclosed elevated structure to confront an unknown occupant, alone, without communication, was not a judgment any experienced ranger would call sound. He wrote in his field notebook, 11:34 a.m., knocked on tower door, 2 knocks, received 3-knock response from the interior. Padlock intact, no visible entry point. Did not force entry. Returning to lower trailhead. Recommend welfare check before reopening. He photographed the padlock. He photographed the door. He photographed the tower from all 4 sides. Then he went back down the trail. He stopped at the upper trail register on his way down. It was a simple metal box on a post at the upper end of the segment, identical to the lower register, positioned for hikers coming from the other direction. He opened it and checked the logbook inside. The most recent entry was from that day, dated correctly, the month and day matching his field notebook date. Time listed as 10:30 a.m. He had arrived at the lower trailhead at 8 and had been on trail since. He had not passed another person. The soft, storm-wet soil had shown him no other boot prints. The handwriting was neat and unhurried. The entry read, "Weather good. Quiet up here, no name, no permit number, no trail affiliation." Just those 4 words in a hand that was not his. He photographed it and kept walking. He reached the lower trailhead at 4:23 p.m. and sat in his truck for a few minutes before starting the engine. He called dispatch and gave his exit time and a brief verbal summary and said he would have a written report by end of week. He drove back to the district office and wrote the report that evening, sitting at his desk with the photographs pulled up on his laptop and his field notebook open beside the keyboard. The report was thorough and precise and described the blowdown locations and the drainage impacts and the estimated crew hours for clearing and the tower inspection and the knock. It included the upper register entry as an attachment. He filed it. He went home. A crew went out the following week to begin clearing the blowdowns. They found no evidence of trespass. The tower lock was intact. They reported no unusual findings. The trail reopened 3 weeks later. Dale transferred to a desk position in the district office 6 months after the assessment. He had been considering it anyway, he told people. His knees. The paperwork was more manageable from an office. These were not untrue things. On his last official day in the field, out of uniform, on his own time, he drove back to the upper trailhead and walked the closed segment from the top end down to the tower. The trail was open by then, maintained, the blowdowns cleared to sections. He went to the upper register and opened it and looked at the entry. The paper was not yellowed. The ink had not faded. The handwriting was neat and unhurried. He photographed it again, in better light than before, and stood at the register box for a while before closing it. He transferred the photograph to a small print he kept in his truck console. He did not enter it into any official record. He did not show it to anyone in the district. He told his nephew once the thing he had not put in any report. 24 years of trail work, search and rescue, lost hikers, storm response. He knew what a person sounded like in distress. He knew what a person sounded like when they were pretending to be in distress. He knew what a person sounded like when they were curious, and when they were afraid, and when they were trying to draw you in a specific direction. Whatever was on that trail had learned the signal correctly. It had the 3 blasts, the spacing, the appropriate pitch and duration. It had all the technical elements exactly right, but it didn't know when to stop. A person in distress uses the signal until they are found, and then they stop. A person running a deliberate deception uses it strategically, leading you somewhere or keeping you away from somewhere, and then they stop. Whatever was on that trail used the signal long past the point where either of those purposes made sense. It used it after he had cleared the area it was coming from. It used it from behind him when he was already past the point of turning back. It used it from the tower after he knocked on a locked door. It used it like something that had learned the behavior, but not the reason for it. He retired with a clean record and a full pension and a photograph in his truck console of 4 words written in an empty register on a closed trail on a Tuesday in November when no one but him had been there. He has never requested a transfer back to field assessment. Nobody asked him why. The next account didn't happen to a stranger in an unfamiliar place or a ranger on a closed trail. It happened on land a man had worked his whole life, in a hollow his grandfather had named, in a place where the rules weren't posted on a kiosk sign. They were handed down at kitchen tables, repeated before hunting seasons, carried in the particular way that family knowledge gets carried, without explanation, without drama, as simple fact. Don't answer it if it calls your name from that hollow. Just come up the hill. Coy had heard that his whole life. He just hadn't needed it yet. Coy had been hunting that hollow since he was 11 years old, which made it 39 years by the November morning in question, and in 39 years he had learned the land the way you learn a person you live with. Not just the geography of it, but the moods, the way it sounded in different weather, the places it held dear and the places it didn't, the spots where the creek ran shallow enough to cross, and the spots where it didn't matter how shallow it looked because the bottom was soft and you'd go into the knee. His family had owned the property in Clay County, West Virginia, since his grandfather bought it in 1951, and the boundaries of it were as familiar to him as the rooms of his own house. He drove out the morning after Thanksgiving, which was traditional. His son had offered to come, and Coy had said next year, same as he said most years, because the morning after Thanksgiving was specifically a solo morning in his personal calendar. A transition, a breathing space between the noise of the holiday and whatever came after it. He left before 4, thermos of coffee on the seat beside him, rifle in the back, boots already on, because he'd learned decades ago that lacing boots in the dark while sitting on a truck tailgate was a young man's exercise in patience that he no longer needed to practice. He parked at the field edge, which is what they called the flat area at the end of the access road, though it had not been a true field since the early 90s when the family stopped running cattle, and the brush came back and then the young hardwoods came back behind the brush. He could walk it in the dark without a light if he needed to. He had walked it in the dark without a light many times, but he used the small flashlight anyway because there was no particular virtue in refusing assistance that was available. The trail to the stand was a quarter-mile of old logging path, packed dirt, tree roots crossing it at intervals he knew by feel, a slight left bend at the 200-yard mark, and then a steeper pitch down into the hollow before it leveled and came out at the base of the white oak where the stand was. He built that stand himself, him and his father, the summer he turned 20. He had replaced the boards twice since. The stand knew his weight. He was settled in by 5:15, which gave him a full hour before the gray light would begin separating the tree shapes from the dark. He poured a careful inch of coffee into the thermos cap, the way you pour coffee when any noise matters, and held it in both hands and let the steam come up. The hollow below him was invisible, a texture of darkness different from the darkness of the sky, the sound of the creek in it moving through the cold air with the consistency of something that had been running for a very long time and intended to keep running. He thought about his grandfather, briefly, the way you think about people in familiar places where they used to stand. His grandfather had built the original logging path, had known this hollow before the second growth came in, when it was open timber country worked by a different family, had passed on what he knew about it in the particular way he passed on everything, practically without ceremony, usually while doing something else. The rule had come across a kitchen table, the October before Coy's first solo hunt. His grandfather sitting with coffee, Coy's father at the counter. His grandfather had said it the way he said practical things, not dramatically, not building to it. Don't answer it if it calls your name from that hollow. Just come up the hill. Coy had been 12. He had understood it as a rule of the land, the same category as don't cross the creek in the dark and don't leave your stand in the first hour. He had not asked what it referred to because some rules you understood were not about the explanation. They were about the compliance. 39 years of hunting that hollow, and he had never heard anything he needed to apply the rule to. The gray came up slowly, the way it does in a wooded hollow in November. The shapes arriving out of the dark in stages. The white oak first, because it was close, and then the near brush line, and then the cleared area that had been the field, and then the far tree line, and finally the slope below, dropping toward the creek. He watched it happen with the patient attention of someone who had watched it happen many times, and still found it worth watching. By 6:30, he could see clearly enough to shoot. He settled into the stand's particular stillness and let the thermos sit cold beside him and watched the field edge and thought about nothing, with some success. At 7:15, he heard his name. It came from the direction of the creek, which was below and to his left. Down the slope from the stand, maybe 150 yards through the bare November brush. Clear, single instance, no repetition. His first name only. The way his mother had called him from the porch when she wanted him inside for something. Not urgent, not loud, just aimed at him specifically with the confidence of someone who knew he was close enough to hear. His mother had been dead for 7 years. He did not move. His first thought was his son, who had offered to come that morning and been told next year. His son knew where the stand was. His son sometimes changed his mind. Sound in a hollow did strange things. Compressed and directed by the slope and the creek drainage in ways that altered distance and character. And it was entirely possible that his son had driven out after breakfast and was calling up from the creek crossing. He waited. His son would call again, or would appear at the field edge, or would make the particular noise of someone walking through brush who is not trying to be quiet because they have no reason to be. He waited for any of those things. He heard none of them. For 20 minutes, the hollow was quiet in the way it was always quiet after a sound that had not been repeated. A listening quiet, the birds having registered the voice the same way he had, and taken a moment to decide what to do with it. Then they came back, the small ones first, and the hollow resumed its ordinary texture. He had almost made his peace with it, almost filed it in the category of sounds that belonged to mornings in hollow country, sounds that the drainage shaped into suggestions of familiar things. When it came again, same direction, same voice. His name, once unhurried, but this time with more presence to it, the way a sound has more presence when the thing producing it has moved closer. He looked at the slope below the stand. Through the bare brush, at the distance of the creek, he could see the stone foundation. His great-grandfather had built a small outbuilding there, a milk house or a spring house. The family history on this was imprecise, and it had been ruins for as long as Coy could remember. 3 courses of flat stone, a partial fourth wall, the interior filled with decades of leaf fall. He could see it through the bare November branches because there were no leaves to block the sight line, just the gray latticework of the brush and the flat stones beyond it. Something was standing on the far side of the foundation. He could see it in the gaps between the branches, a shape upright on the far side of the stone wall. He could not see it clearly. The brush was too dense for clarity at that distance, but it was there in the way that shapes are there when you have been looking at empty space long enough to know the difference between empty space and space that contains something. It was not moving. He sat in the stand with his hands on his knees and looked at the shape through the brush and did not call back and did not speak and did not move. And the hollow below him held the silence of a place where 2 things are both very still and both waiting. He watched it for a long time. The shape on the far side of the foundation did not move in the way animals move when they are aware of being watched. No slow shifting of weight, no ear rotation, no subtle adjustment of posture that betrays a nervous system processing threat. It simply stood. The brush between Coy and the foundation was dense enough that he was reading the shape in fragments, pieces of it visible through gaps in the branches, assembled by his brain into a coherent upright form, the way you assemble a word from letters glimpsed through a fence. He could not see a face. He could not see hands. He could see the general verticality of it and the stillness of it, and the fact that it was on the far side of the stone wall in a place where the foundation's partial fourth wall would have put it at roughly the height of a standing person. He had been hunting this hollow for 39 years. He knew what a deer looked like at distance through bare brush. He knew what a coyote looked like, what a turkey looked like, what a person looked like at the far edge of visibility in November light. He knew the difference between a shape that was an animal and a shape that was something that stood like a person. This stood like a person. He gave it 5 minutes, motionless in the stand, and then his name came a third time. Same voice, same direction, but the rhythm was wrong. He understood this immediately, the way you understand things that involve sounds you know extremely well. His mother had called his name thousands of times over 51 years, from porches and kitchen doorways and across fields and up stairwells, and he knew the weight distribution of it, which syllable she leaned on, where the pitch rose and where it settled, the particular length she gave the vowel when she was calling from distance versus when she was close. He knew it the way he knew his own handwriting. This had the right sounds in the right order. It had the right pitch range. But the weight was off. The syllable that should have carried was light, and the syllable that should have been light was carrying too much, and the overall effect was of something that had learned the word by hearing it and was reproducing it without understanding where the emphasis lived. Close, very close, but not right. That was when he remembered the rule fully, not as a general principle, as his grandfather's specific voice across a specific kitchen table, the October before his first solo hunt. Whatever it is, it can't do it exactly right. It'll call you close, but not perfect. That's how you know. He had not thought about those words in years. They came back now with the complete clarity of things that were said simply and without drama, and meant to be carried without examination until the moment they were needed. And that moment was apparently this one, at 7:40 in the morning on the day after Thanksgiving, in a hollow his family had worked for 4 generations. He began moving out of the stand. He did it slowly and without sound, the way he had been trained by years of hunting to move in a stand when something below had not yet located him precisely. He unclipped the safety harness, lowered his rifle on its rope, climbed down the ladder pegs one at a time with his weight distributed carefully so the wood did not creak. He reached the ground and picked up the rifle and stood at the base of the white oak and listened. The shape at the foundation had not moved that he could see. He took the uphill path. This was the specific instruction, the part his grandfather had said after the rule itself. Just come up the hill. Not the logging path he had come in on, which ran level through the hollow, and would have kept him at creek elevation for 200 yards before climbing. The uphill path was a deer trail that switchbacked up the slope behind the stand and came out on the field edge from the high side, longer and steeper, but gaining elevation immediately. His grandfather had specified it. He had never understood why until this moment, when the understanding arrived without requiring explanation. Get above it, get away from the hollow, get to high ground, and then to the road. He was 200 yards up the slope, breathing harder than the grade warranted, when his name came again from below. not his mother's voice this time. Close to it, the same general register, the same attempt at the particular inflection she used, but less precise than the third call had been. As if the attempt was degrading rather than improving, the approximation becoming rougher rather than smoother, the way a copy of a copy loses resolution with each generation. He could hear the effort in it, which was the part that stayed with him longest afterward. Not the sound of something that sounded like his mother, the sound of something working at sounding like his mother. He did not answer. He kept moving. He reached the field edge and crossed it at a diagonal, angling for the access road, not running, but not the pace of a man who was comfortable either. The brush was thin at this elevation, and the gray November sky was open above him, and he could see the roof of his truck at the road's end, and he focused on that and kept his feet moving. He got in the truck and sat. He did not start the engine for 10 minutes. He sat with his hands on the steering wheel and looked through the windshield at the field edge and the hollow beyond it, and let his breathing even out. He was not a man who frightened easily. He had been frightened. He was being honest with himself about that, sitting in the truck cab with the doors locked and the rifle in the back seat, and he sat with the honesty of it until it settled into something he could carry. He called his cousin when he reached a signal 3 miles down the county road. His cousin drove out. They did not go back to the stand. They stood on the field edge above the hollow, high ground, which felt correct without either of them saying so, and looked down at the slope and the brush and the pale shape of the stone foundation through the bare branches. From this angle, above it, the foundation looked like what it was: old flat stones in a creek hollow, nothing standing on the far side of them, the interior filling of leaf fall undisturbed. They walked the field perimeter and looked down at the creek crossing from the high bank. The creek ran clear and cold over the flat rock ford. The metal gate that Coy's father had welded shut in 1998 was open. Coy stood at the bank and looked at it. The gate crossed the creek at the lower property boundary, a simple 2-bar cattle gate that his father had welded to its post in 1998 because the hinge pins had rusted and it would not stay closed. And a gate that would not stay closed was not a functioning boundary. His father had run a bead of weld along the hinge side and another along the latch side and had said, "That'll hold until someone cuts it." Nobody had cut it. Coy could see the welds from the bank, both intact, both unbroken, the metal uncorroded at the weld points. The gate was simply open. The hinges that had been welded fast were not holding. He called his father that evening. His father listened without interrupting, which was how he listened to things he was taking seriously. When Coy finished, his father was quiet for a moment and then said, "Your grandfather welded that same crossing shut in 1962. Before the cattle gate, there was a wooden rail crossing, and he pulled it out and put the gate in and welded it. He said whatever was in that hollow had learned the voice of every person in the family going back further than he could name, and the gate was the boundary, and the boundary needed to hold." Coy asked what his grandfather thought it was. His father said he didn't speculate. He said, "Don't answer it and don't give it a new voice to learn." He said that was the whole of what you needed to know. Coy has not hunted the hollow stand since. He goes to a different stand on the upper ridge now, above the field edge, where the elevation is good and the sight lines are long, and the creek drainage is far enough below that sound from it arrives changed and general rather than specific and aimed. He has not told his children the full account. He has told them the rule, the way his grandfather told it, across a table, without drama, as simple operational fact. Don't answer it from the hollow, just come up the hill. The gate at the creek crossing is still open. He checked it once, the following spring from the high bank. Welds intact, gate open. He did not go down to it. He turned around and walked back up the slope to the field edge and got in his truck and drove home, and the rule passed to him at a kitchen table by a man who had gotten it from somewhere older than his own memory was still the whole of what he needed to know. The next account didn't come from family land or a closed trail. It came from a rental listing with 5 stars and 63 reviews, and a photograph of a mountain view that looked exactly as good as it did in person. Priya had booked it 6 months in advance. She had read every review. She had not read the guest book because the guest book was not in the listing. Nobody mentioned the guest book. Priya had done her research the way she did most things, which was thoroughly and with a degree of optimism that her husband Soren described as her best quality, and occasionally her most expensive one. She had found the listing in April, cross-referenced it against 3 different travel forums, read all 63 reviews, looked at every photograph, and emailed the listing contact twice with questions about the water pressure and the cell service situation before putting down the deposit. The listing described the property as a historic mountain community cabin, fully restored, 1940s construction, writing loft, 2 bedrooms, wood stove, mountain views, walking distance to local diner. It had sounded in April like exactly what a long weekend in November should be. They arrived on a Friday afternoon in the thin, late-season light, driving up through Ashe County on a 2-lane road that climbed steadily through second-growth forest before cresting a ridge and descending into the small community that sat in the fold between 2 slopes. It was the kind of place that had been a working mountain community once. A post office, a church, a bait shop, a diner with a hand-painted sign, and had become something adjacent to that. A place where most of the families had been there long enough that the community's identity was still intact, even if the economy that had originally built it was not. About 200 residents, the listing had said. It felt accurate. The cabin was at the upper edge of the community, set on a slight rise above the main road, with a view across the valley to the opposite ridge. They found the key in the lockbox on the porch post and let themselves in. Wood floors, whitewashed walls, the particular smell of old construction that has been carefully maintained, wood oil and plaster, and the faint ghost of every fire that had ever burned in the stone fireplace. The loft was up a steep staircase, a low-ceilinged room with a writing desk, and a window that framed the ridge exactly. Soren put his bag down and stood at the window for a moment, in the way people stand at views they have been told about, and find that the telling was accurate. They went to the diner for dinner at 6. It was a small room, 8 tables, a counter with 4 stools, a chalkboard menu on the wall behind the register. One waitress working the whole room, a woman named Ruth, who appeared to be in her late 60s and moved through the space with the efficiency of someone who had been navigating it for a very long time, and no longer needed to think about where anything was. The food was good: soup, cornbread, a pork dish with something Priya could not identify but ate completely. Ruth checked on them twice without hovering, refilled their water without being asked, and when Priya asked about the ridge walk she had read about, Ruth gave directions that were precise and practical, and included specific landmarks rather than distances. Soren bought a candy bar from the bait shop next door before they drove back up to the cabin. The bait shop owner was a man of few words who made change from a cigar box and did not look up from whatever he was reading when they left. At the cabin, Priya found the guest book. It was on the kitchen counter, pushed back against the wall behind the dish rack, a standard composition notebook with the word "Guests" written on the front in faded marker. She brought it to the main room, got the fire going, and settled into the chair nearest the fireplace with the book in her lap while Soren made tea in the kitchen. The entries went back to 2011. She read them in order, the way she read things, from the beginning. The handwriting changed constantly. Different people, different pens, different relationships to the act of writing in a public book. Some entries were brief, just dates and a line about the view. Others were longer, domestic and specific. What they had cooked, what the weather had been, which trails they had walked. She liked reading them. It was like finding a small archive of ordinary happiness, the accumulated record of people who had found the place worth visiting and wanted to say so. She was 2/3 through the book when she found the entry that stopped her. It was dated 14 months prior. She checked it twice. The handwriting was neat and deliberate, the kind of handwriting that belongs to someone who was taught cursive and still uses it. The entry described an arrival, a first evening, the diner, Ruth, the ridge view at dusk. All ordinary. And then, one small thing for light sleepers, the cabin carries sound in unusual ways at night. We heard what sounded like chairs moving in the building below us on the road. It stopped after a while. The diner, probably, or just the mountain doing what mountains do at night. If it bothers you, the radio in the kitchen helps. We left it on low and slept fine. Priya read it twice. She looked out the dark window toward where the diner was, below the rise, invisible from this angle, but close enough that she could see its parking lot light if she went to the porch. She thought, old communities, old buildings, sound traveling up a slope at night in ways it wouldn't in flat terrain. Mountain acoustics. She turned the page. She was near the end of the book when Soren called her for tea, and she set it down without finishing the last few entries, which she would think about later. She woke at 2 in the morning. Not from a dream, from a sound. She lay in the dark of the downstairs bedroom and listened and identified it within a few seconds. The sound of chair legs on a wooden floor. The specific scrape and drag of furniture being moved or adjusted, coming from below the rise, from the direction of the diner. Distinct, repeated. Not a single movement, but several, spaced irregularly. The sound of a room being rearranged or set up. She lay still and listened until it stopped at approximately 20 past 2, then lay still for a while longer, and then slept. In the morning over coffee, she told Soren. He suggested early kitchen prep, staff coming in before opening. Sound carrying strangely up the hill in the cold air. These were reasonable explanations, and she held them as reasonable and went for the ridge walk Ruth had described, which was exactly as good as advertised, and came back hungry and satisfied and almost entirely unbothered. Almost. She picked up the guest book after lunch and found her place and read the final entries. There were 3 after the one she had stopped at. 2 were brief and positive. The third was the last entry in the book, and it was the one that made her set the book down on the kitchen table and look at it from a slight distance, the way you look at something you want to examine without touching again. It was dated 14 months prior. Same month as the previous entry, same year, but a different hand. A faster hand, slightly smaller. The letters formed with the efficiency of someone writing quickly. The date at the top was identical to the date of the entry before it. Same day. 2 different people writing in the same book on the same day, one entry following the other, except that the handwriting was entirely different, and the content was not a continuation of the previous entry's pleasant account. She could make out most of it. The entry described a second night. It described a sound from below the rise, chairs, the same as she had heard, and then something else. Something that came after the chair sound stopped. Something at the cabin door. The entry was not hysterical. It was written in the same efficient hand throughout, controlled and factual in the way that people are controlled and factual when they are writing something down because writing it down is the only way to make sense of it. The last line read, "Don't open it if it knocks at 2. Priya looked at the clock on the kitchen wall. It was 1:47 p.m. She photographed every page of the final entry with her phone. Then she photographed the entry before it, and the one before that, and the guestbook cover, and the binding where the pages met the spine, because she wanted a record of the sequence. Then she noticed the gap in the binding. Between the last written entry and the back cover, where the paper met the spine, there was a narrow stub of remaining paper. The clean edge left when a page has been carefully removed, not torn, cut or folded and separated with patience and intention. Whatever the removed page had contained was gone, and whatever it had contained had been removed by someone who did not want it read. She set the guestbook on the kitchen table. She looked at it for a moment. Then she went to find Soren, who had gone down to the bait shop for something to do with the afternoon, because she wanted to talk to Ruth before the diner closed at 3. She got to the diner at 2:45, which gave her 15 minutes before closing, and Ruth was wiping down the counter when Priya came in and looked up with the particular expression of someone who is not surprised to see you, but is waiting to find out why you came. Priya sat at the counter. She put her phone on the Formica with the guestbook photograph open, the final entry, the fast, efficient handwriting. She turned it so Ruth could see it. Ruth looked at it. She did not pick up the phone. She looked at it for a few seconds the way you look at something you recognize and have decided how to handle. And then she refilled Priya's coffee cup from the pot she was already holding and set the pot back on the burner and said, "I remember that couple. They left on the second morning, early." Priya waited. Ruth folded the dish towel she had been using and set it on the counter. She said, "Old cabins make sounds. These mountains carry sound funny at night. Best not to look for it." Priya asked about the diner's hours. Ruth said the diner opened at 6 and closed at 3, that she did her own prep starting at 5:30 in the morning, and that she lived in the apartment directly above the dining room, had lived there for 11 years, and would know if someone was in her kitchen at 2 in the morning because her bedroom floor was the kitchen ceiling and she was a light sleeper. Priya asked about the sound she had heard the previous night. Ruth said, "What kind of sound?" Priya said, "Chairs on a wooden floor, from this direction around 2. Ruth looked at her for a moment. Then she said, "I didn't hear anything." She said it in the particular way that is not a lie, but is not the complete truth either. The way you say something that is technically accurate when the fuller answer is something you have decided not to give. Priya asked, as carefully as she could, about the motel room she had noticed attached to the diner's side wall. 2 doors on the exterior, the kind of addition that small rural operations sometimes built when the highway brought enough overnight traffic to make it worth the construction. Ruth's expression didn't change exactly. It closed. There is a difference, and Priya noticed it. "Room 1 is storage," Ruth said. "Room 2 we keep locked." She did not say anything else, and her posture had taken on the quality of a conversation that was over. So Priya thanked her for the coffee and left $2 on the counter and walked out into the thin November afternoon. Soren was outside the bait shop with a hand-warming packet he had bought for no particular reason. She told him what Ruth had said. He listened and then looked at the motel room doors on the diner's exterior wall, which were visible from where they stood. 2 plain doors, painted the same green as the diner's trim, the kind of addition that had been there long enough to look like it had always been there. Room 2's window, the small rectangular window set high in the door, was covered from the inside. Not curtained, covered. Something dark pressed against the glass from the interior, a towel or a blanket, held in place by what appeared to be tape at the upper corners. They walked back up to the cabin. Priya spent the remainder of the afternoon reading. Soren made dinner. They did not talk extensively about what she had found or what Ruth had said, which was its own kind of conversation, the kind conducted in the space between topics, In the way people move around a subject they have tacitly agreed to leave alone until they have more information or until they have gotten through the night, whichever came first. At 10, they went to bed. Priya lay in the dark and looked at the ceiling and listened to the cabin's ordinary sounds, which she had catalogued the previous night and which were the same tonight. The wood settling, the fire in the main room ticking down, the faint mechanical sound of the kitchen clock. She was aware of the time in the way you are aware of time when you are waiting for a specific thing, which is constantly and with the particular exhaustion of attention that cannot relax. At 2, the chair sounds began. Below the rise, from the diner, the same scrape and drag of furniture on wood floor. She listened to them, and they were identical to the previous night. The same irregular spacing, the same quality, the same duration of maybe 15 minutes. She lay still and breathed and counted the intervals between sounds and tried to find a pattern that suggested a mechanical or structural cause, pipes or thermal expansion or settling, and could not, because the sounds were not regular enough for mechanical cause and too regular for random settling. At 17 minutes past 2, the chair sound stopped. The cabin was quiet for approximately 3 minutes. Then 3 knocks at the front door. Slow, even. The same patience she had read about in the guestbook entry. The word she had used to herself when she read it. Patience. As if patience was a quality of the thing doing the knocking rather than merely a description of its rhythm. Soren was already sitting up. She put her hand on his arm before he moved further. She had her phone in her other hand. She opened the photograph of the guestbook entry and held the screen toward him in the dark. Don't open it if it knocks at 2. He read it. He looked at the door. He looked at her. They sat in the dark bedroom and did not go to the door and did not speak, and the cabin was completely silent around the knocking for the 3 beats of it, and then completely silent after, and nothing further came. No second set of knocks, no sound of movement on the porch, no footstep on the wooden boards outside the window. Just the 3 knocks, and then the silence of a place that had made its inquiry and was waiting with the same patience for whatever the answer would be. They did not answer. They sat upright in the bed until the window began going gray, which took until a little after 6, and then Priya got up and made coffee, and they packed their bags with the focused efficiency of people who have mutually agreed on something without discussing it. At first light, Priya checked the porch. The boards held a light rime of frost, the kind that accumulates on cold, still nights and records disturbance faithfully. The frost between the door and the porch steps was unbroken. She walked the perimeter of the porch slowly, looking at the boards. At the far end, near the corner post, the porch swing had moved. She had noted its position on the first afternoon, pushed to the left of center, one chain slightly twisted, because she had thought about sitting in it and had decided it was too cold. The swing was now centered. Both chains hung straight. No footprints in the frost. Nothing on the steps. The swing centered and the chains straight, and no indication of how either of those things had happened. She photographed it. She photographed the porch from the steps, the diner below the rise with its covered room 2 window visible at this angle, the frost on the boards, the swing. They carried their bags to the car. Soren made one trip back for the coffee thermos. When they drove past the diner on their way out, Ruth was inside, visible through the window, beginning her morning prep. She looked up when their car passed. She nodded once, the specific nod of someone who has seen this before and is neither surprised nor unsurprised, who has simply observed it enough times to have arrived at a place beyond both. Priya messaged the listing platform from the highway when she got signal, requesting information about the previous guests from 14 months prior for what she described as a safety concern. She received a response 4 days later explaining that guest information was confidential and that she was welcome to leave a review of her experience. She sent a message to the property contact. No response. She looked up the listing 3 weeks later from home to see if it was still active. It was. 67 reviews now, 4 more than when she had booked. She looked at the listing photographs. The guest book appeared in one of them, open on the kitchen table, positioned as a charming detail. The kind of thing that signals authenticity, real guests, a place with history. It was open to page 12. She had photographed it at page 41. Someone had repositioned it before the next round of listing photographs were taken, opened it to an earlier page, a page full of pleasant, ordinary entries about ridge views and good food and the particular quality of quiet that mountain places have at night. A page that ended well before the fast, efficient handwriting, well before the final entry, well before the stub in the binding where a page had been removed by someone who understood what it said. The listing had 5 stars. The most recent review said the mountain views were worth the drive. The reviewer did not mention the guest book. There was no reason they would have. They had presumably seen it the way Priya had seen it on her first evening, as a charming object, a record of happy visitors, and had not read far enough, or had not read it at all, or had not woken at 2 a.m. to the sound of chairs on a wooden floor, and lain in the dark counting the minutes until they found out what came after. The cabin was still available for rent. She did not leave a review. She was not sure what she would say, or who was reading them, or whether the parts that mattered could be said in the space the platform provided. Some things did not fit in a review. Some things only fit in a guest book, written fast in the small hours by someone who understood they were writing it for the next person rather than for themselves, leaving the only warning they could in the only place it might be found. The trail they found it on started like every other trail they had hiked together. Same parking lot ritual, same gear check, same easy first mile that makes you remember why you do this. The difference was the sign at the ford, and the fact that they had hiked this trail before, and the sign had not been there in June, and the fact that they crossed anyway because they knew this trail, and the waterfall was their waterfall, and some places feel like they belong to you until the moment they don't. Fen and Margot had hiked the trail 11 times by the count they kept in a shared note on Fen's phone, which had started as a practical record of conditions and distances, and had become something closer to a private log of a relationship conducted partly outdoors. First hike in March, 2 years prior, when the creek was running high with snowmelt, and they had stopped short of the ford because the water was too fast to cross safely. Second hike in May, when they made it through and found the waterfall and ate lunch on the flat rocks beside it, and stayed longer than they had planned. Every subsequent visit had confirmed what the second one established. The waterfall at mile 3.2 was their place on that trail, which is the particular kind of ownership that hikers develop over locations that cannot be owned, based entirely on the accumulation of personal history with them. They arrived at the trailhead on a Saturday in late October, the last weekend before the clocks changed, in the specific window of late-season hiking when the leaves are mostly down and the trail opens up and the distances feel different without the summer canopy. Fen drove. Margot had the day pack with lunch and the water filter and the first aid kit she carried on every hike and had never opened in 2 years. They did the trailhead ritual, locked the car, checked the pack, confirmed the phone was charged, started the GPS track, and started down the trail at 9 a.m. in thin autumn sunlight that made the bare hardwoods look like something architectural. The trail was familiar the way good trails become familiar. Not just the route, but the texture of it, the places where the routes crossed, the section with the loose shale at the third switchback, the gap in the trees at the ridgeline where you could see the opposite slope. They moved at their regular pace, which was comfortable rather than ambitious, talking in the easy way of people who have been together long enough that silence and conversation occupy the same comfortable register. At mile 2.4, they reached the ford. The sign was on a metal post on the near bank, facing the trail, orange lettering on white. Creek access closed, seasonal restriction. No crossing beyond this point. A Forest Service notice, standard format, the kind of sign the agency put up for wildlife protection during sensitive periods or for bank erosion control during high water seasons. Fenn stopped and read it. Margot stopped beside him. They looked at the creek. It was running at a normal late-season level, clear and low over the flat rock shelf of the ford. The water maybe 8 inches deep at the crossing. The ford itself was completely visible and completely passable. They looked at each other. Margot said, "It wasn't here in June." Fenn said it was probably an erosion thing, seasonal. The bank on the far side had looked a little undercut last time. He looked at the sign again. It gave no specific reason for the closure, which was standard. Forest Service signs rarely explained themselves, just stated the restriction and the authority behind it. He looked at the ford. He looked at the trail on the far side, which continued visibly through the bare trees toward the waterfall 1.5 miles further on. Margot photographed the sign. She did it automatically, the way she photographed trailhead kiosks and permit boxes, a documentation habit. She framed the sign in the foreground with the creek and the far bank visible behind it, a photograph she would look at again 8 months later under entirely different circumstances. They crossed. The ford was easy at this water level. 6 steps across the flat rocks, boots staying dry if you hit the right line, which they both knew from 11 crossings. They stepped up onto the far bank and continued without discussion, the way you continue past a sign that applies to a season or a situation that does not feel like your situation on this particular morning. The trail on the far side ran parallel to the creek for the next 1.5 miles before reaching the waterfall. The rhododendron along the creek bank was dense even in late October, the leaves persistent and dark green, growing in the thick interlocking way that rhododendron grows in creek drainages in the southern Appalachians, creating a wall of vegetation between the trail and the water that was visually impenetrable more than 1 foot or 2 deep. At approximately the 1/4 mile mark past the ford, Margot touched Fenn's arm. She said, "There's something in the rhododendron." He stopped and looked. On the far bank, behind the rhododendron wall, something pale was moving. Low to the ground, maybe 2 feet up, moving in the same direction they were moving. It was visible only in the gaps between the branches. A glimpse, then nothing, then another glimpse, the pale shape passing through the narrow windows of visibility as it moved through the dense vegetation. Fenn said, "Deer." Margot said, "It's too low for a deer." He looked again. She was right. Whatever it was moving close to the ground, not at the height of a deer's body. He watched the next gap in the rhododendron and caught the pale shape for a fraction of a second and could make nothing specific of it. Low, pale, moving. He said, "Big bird maybe, heron working the bank." She said, "Moving that fast?" He didn't have an answer for that. The shape, in the gaps where it was visible, was moving at roughly their walking pace, which was not how herons moved along creek banks. He watched it for another 30 seconds and then it was gone. No final glimpse, just absence where there had been presence. And he decided to file it with the other things that happen in dense vegetation near water that resist easy explanation, and continued up the trail. For 10 minutes, there was nothing. Then Fen heard it. Under the creek sound, which was continuous and moderately loud at this section of the drainage, there was another sound. Periodic, distinct from the water. A low displacement, like something moving through the shallows in a sustained way. Not the random sound of water moving over rocks, but the sound of water being moved through, pushed aside, interrupted by something progressing through it with intention. He stopped walking and the creek sound continued, and the other sound continued under it for 3 seconds and then stopped. He started walking and it started again. He said, "Stop!" They both stopped. The creek ran. The displacement sound did not continue. Margot said, "What?" He said, "Walk again." They walked. The sound resumed within 4 steps, low, periodic, from the creek on their left, moving with them, maintaining their pace with the consistency of something that had no reason to vary its speed because it was not going somewhere specific. It was going where they were going, at the speed they were going, through the water on the other side of the rhododendron wall. Margot said, "That's not the creek," he said. "No." They kept walking because they were 3/4 of a mile from the waterfall, and the trail was between them and the ford, and whatever was in the creek was in the creek and they were on the bank. And those were 2 different places. And the most rational response to an unidentified sound in a creek was to note it and continue, rather than to stand still in the middle of a trail and wait for it to clarify itself. The rhododendron thinned slightly at the half-mile mark, and Margot caught the pale shape again through a wider gap. She saw it for perhaps 2 seconds, long enough to register that it was not a heron and not a deer and not a log moving in current, because it was moving upstream and the current ran downstream and those were not the same direction. Long enough to register pale and low and moving with the specific quality of something that knew where it was going. She did not say what she saw. She took out her phone and photographed the rhododendron bank. The image showed leaves and branches and shadow and nothing identifiable, which was what she expected, and she put the phone away and kept walking. They reached the waterfall at 11:30 and stopped at the flat rocks beside the pool, and Fen turned off the GPS track and they stood for a moment in the particular stillness of the waterfall's vicinity, where the sound of the falling water reorganized the acoustic space and made the world feel briefly enclosed and complete. The pool below the falls was knee-deep and clear, the bottom visible in full detail. They stood at the edge and looked into it. On the silt bottom, moving upstream through still water, were 2 long, parallel impressions. Not tracks exactly, more like the marks left by something dragging close to the bottom, something that disturbed the silt in a continuous line rather than in discrete footfalls. The marks came from the direction of the trail, from downstream from the direction they had walked. They moved toward the falls. They were fresh. The silt at the edges of the impressions had not yet fully settled. Moving upstream, through water with no appreciable current, from the direction they had come. Fen looked at them for a long time. Then he took out his phone and photographed the pool and the marks in the silt. He looked at the photograph. He looked at the pool. He looked at the waterfall above them, white and loud and entirely indifferent to everything below it. Margot said, "We should eat lunch." He said, "Yeah?" They ate on the flat rocks. They ate efficiently and without much conversation, and when the food was gone, they packed up the wrappers and the water bottles and stood up. They turned to walk back the way they had come. Margot looked back at the waterfall once before they left the flat rocks. The pool below the falls was still. The silt marks were there, exactly as they had been, 2 long parallel lines moving upstream through the settled bottom. She looked at them, and then looked at the rhododendron wall on the far bank, which was dense and closed and showed nothing. Then she turned and followed Fen down the trail. They were 3 minutes out from the waterfall when she heard it. Not ahead of them, behind them. From the pool, from the creek below the falls, the same low displacement sound they had heard on the way in. Something moving through the water, something pacing. Something that had apparently been at the waterfall with them, or had arrived there after them and was now moving downstream, which was the direction they were walking, at the speed they were walking. She said, "Fen." He said, "I hear it." They kept walking. The sound kept pace. It was louder than it had been on the approach, or clearer. The rhododendron on this section of the bank had a different density, slightly thinner, and the water displacement sound came through without the same muffling. She could hear it move. She could hear the periodic low push of something progressing through shallow water, with the unhurried consistency of something that was exactly where it intended to be. Fen increased their pace without discussing it. He did not run. The trail had roots and loose sections, and running on an unfamiliar surface with a day pack was how you twisted an ankle and turned a strange afternoon into a genuine emergency. But he walked faster, and Margot walked faster beside him, and the sound in the creek walked faster too. She said, "It's matching us." He said, "Don't stop." She was not planning to stop. She was watching the trail surface and watching the rhododendron wall in her peripheral vision, and keeping her breathing even and deliberate, the way she coached patients to breathe when they were managing pain, because even and deliberate breathing was the only kind of useful regulation available to her at this moment, and she intended to use it. At the half-mile mark, through a wider gap in the rhododendron, she saw the pale shape again. It was closer to the bank than it had been on the approach, closer to the trail side. She could see it for perhaps 3 seconds in the wider gap before the vegetation closed again, and in those 3 seconds she registered pale and low and moving, and a quality she had not been able to name on the approach because she had not been close enough to identify it, which was that the paleness was not uniform. It had variation, lighter in some places and less light in others, in a way that suggested surface texture rather than smooth material. She looked at the trail and kept moving. The ford was a 1/4 mile ahead. She could hear the creek changing character as the drainage narrowed before the crossing, a slightly different pitch as the water concentrated over the flat rock shelf. She focused on that sound as a navigational anchor and kept Fen's pace and did not look at the rhododendron again. At the ford, she made herself stop. Not for long, a few seconds, long enough to locate the crossing and the 6 flat rock steps and confirm the water level hadn't changed. Fen was already at the bank, choosing the line across. She stood beside him, and they both looked at the creek. Behind them, in the water, something crossed. She felt it more than heard it, a disturbance in the water sound, a brief reorganization of the creek's acoustic pattern the way a sound reorganizes when something large displaces water suddenly and then is gone. She did not turn around. Fen did not turn around. They crossed the ford in 5 steps, not 6, moving faster than was strictly careful over the wet rocks, and stepped up onto the near bank and turned. The creek was empty. The water ran over the flat rock shelf and through the lower pool and around the bend, and the rhododendron on the far bank was dense and closed and showed nothing. The water surface was undisturbed. The crossing looked the way it always looked from this bank. Shallow, clear, the bottom visible, a completely ordinary late-season mountain creek at a completely ordinary ford. She looked at the water for a long moment. On the silt bottom of the near bank, just at the edge of the crossing, there were marks. 2 parallel lines in the silt, the same configuration as the ones in the waterfall pool, running from the water's edge up onto the bank. They ended at the bank. They did not continue up the bank into the soil. They ended at the water's edge as if whatever had made them had come to the bank and then stopped, or had come and gone back into the water before she turned around, in less time than the crossing had taken them. Fen was already walking toward the trailhead. She looked at the marks for 3 more seconds, then followed. The last mile and a half they did not talk. The trail was familiar, and they moved through it at a pace that was not quite running, and was not comfortable hiking either, the pace of people who have tacitly agreed that the objective is the parking lot, and everything else is secondary. The creek ran on their right now that they had crossed, audible but at a distance, and she listened to it with the focused attention of someone who has learned in the last 2 hours to distinguish one kind of water sound from another. She heard nothing in it that was not water. They reached the trailhead at 12:48. Fen's GPS track put their return time at 45 minutes for a mile and a half that had taken over an hour on the way in. He clicked the track closed, and they stood at the trailhead kiosk for a moment. A trail volunteer was replacing the signage at the ford marker, the orange and white seasonal closure sign they had passed on the way in, which had apparently been damaged or needed repositioning. She was working with a socket wrench on the post base and did not look up immediately when they came out of the trail. Then she looked up. She looked at them for a moment with the specific attention of someone assessing information rather than acknowledging a greeting. She said, "Did you cross the ford?" Fen said yes. She said, "You should have read the sign." She did not explain further. She went back to her work with the socket wrench and the post base, repositioning the sign at the angle it needed to be at to face hikers approaching from the trail, and they stood there for a moment waiting to see if she would add anything, and she did not. They drove home mostly in silence. Fen kept the GPS app open on the seat beside him and looked at the track record while Margot drove, because looking at it gave his hand something to do. The track showed their route in and out, a thin blue line going in, a thin blue line coming back, the ford marked as a waypoint at both crossings. At home that evening, he reviewed the track on his laptop where the screen was larger. The track data included pace information, and the pace on the return trip showed a section of approximately 4/10 of a mile, from just past the waterfall to just before the ford, where their recorded speed tripled relative to the surrounding sections without any corresponding change in elevation that would explain the increase. He had known they were moving faster on the return. He had not registered how much faster. He looked at the ford crossing waypoint. The GPS had registered a brief error at the ford, the kind of error water crossings sometimes produced from satellite signal interference. A second location point appearing momentarily at a position offset from the main track. This was common, and he had seen it before on other hikes near water. The offset point appeared, as usual, close to the main track. It appeared 8 feet behind them in the creek, at the exact timestamp of their crossing. It was tagged with the same pace data as their crossing. It was moving downstream. He looked at it for a long time. He closed the laptop and did not open the GPS data again. 8 months later, reviewing her phone photos for an unrelated reason, Margot opened the photograph she had taken of the ford sign at the start of the hike. She had taken it quickly, the way she took documentation photographs without composing it carefully. The sign was in the foreground, readable. The creek was visible behind it. The far bank, where the rhododendron met the water, was visible at the right edge of the frame. At the edge of the rhododendron, half in the vegetation and half in the light, there was a pale shape. She had not seen it when she took the photograph. It had not been what she was photographing. It was there in the image, the way things are, sometimes there in images, present at the margins of attention, visible only in retrospect, captured by the camera without the knowledge of the person holding it. She showed it to Fen. He zoomed in on his phone until the image quality degraded. The shape remained unidentifiable at any resolution. Pale, low, partially obscured by the rhododendron, without any feature she could name with confidence. The creek restriction sign comes up every October now in that section of trail. They have not gone back to check whether the waterfall is still the waterfall they remember, whether the pool still has the same flat rocks, whether the silt bottom still shows what it showed that Saturday in late October. Some places are worth keeping as they were. In the version that existed before the afternoon, you found out they were something other than what you thought. The last account in this collection is the hardest to explain. Not because of what happened on the trail, because of what came back from it. Geneva had been married to Hatch for 19 years, which meant she had 19 years of data on exactly how he moved through their house, exactly how he talked, exactly what he did when he came back from the annual trip. The sequence of it, the small rituals of it, the specific way he reintegrated himself into domestic space after 2 nights alone in the backcountry. She was not a person who cataloged these things consciously. She was a high school librarian who read widely and paid attention to what she read and applied the same attention to the world around her, which meant that after 19 years of marriage, the data existed, whether she had intended to collect it or not. She knew him. She knew the particular way he set a coffee mug down twice before drinking from it, the way he reported a trip always in the same order. Weather first, then wildlife, then campsite condition. The way he filled a doorframe when he was relaxed versus when he was tired. She knew all of it the way you know things that have never needed to be examined because they have always simply been true. The trip was the annual one. The same trip he had taken every October for 11 years. 2 nights solo in a specific section of the Monongahela National Forest. The same route, the same campsites, the same gear shaken out and repacked with the same list he kept in a small notebook in his top dresser drawer. She had never gone with him and had never wanted to. Not because she had any concern about the place, but because the trip was clearly his. Clearly something he needed in the particular way that some people need periods of solitude to remain recognizably themselves, and she had always respected that need without question. He texted her from the trailhead on the way out, Sunday afternoon, when he got signal. He always texted from that point because it was the first reliable signal on the descent, and it was the signal that told her to expect him in about 2 hours. The text said, "Coming down. Trail was good. See you by 5. She read it at 2:40 and went back to the book she was reading and started the rice at 4. He pulled in at 4:47. She heard the truck in the driveway and checked the clock and noted the time the way she noted things without deciding to. 4:47, 13 minutes early, which was unusual because Hatch ran on a reliable internal schedule that typically produced arrivals within 5 minutes of estimate. She went to the kitchen to finish dinner and heard the truck door, and then the porch, and then the front door, and then his boots on the mat, which was the sequence, always the same sequence. She said, "How was it?" He said, "Good, campsite was clear." She turned from the stove. He was in the kitchen doorway with his fleece still on, not yet having made the transition into house clothes that was always his first move after the boots. He looked like himself. He looked like Hatch. The same face she had been looking at for 19 years. The same posture. The same slight squint that came from 2 days of reading light and wind. She felt the warmth of his return the way she always felt it. The specific domestic comfort of a house rebalancing itself. She poured him coffee. He took it with his left hand. She turned back to the stove. He was right-handed. He had been right-handed for the entire duration of their acquaintance, which preceded the marriage by 3 years, which made it 22 years of right-handedness that she had direct knowledge of. She stood at the stove and gave it a moment, the way you give anomalies a moment before deciding what to do with them, and decided it was nothing. He'd probably been carrying something, or his right shoulder was stiff from the pack, or it was simply a random left-handed reach that she was assigning significance to because she was standing at the stove with nothing else to do with her attention. She put dinner on the table. He sat in her chair. This required a beat of adjustment on her part, a slight redirection of her body toward the other chair, his chair, which was to the left of hers, which she had been sitting in for 19 years in the specific configuration they had established without discussion in the first weeks of living together. He was sitting in her chair. He was looking out the window in the particular way he looked out windows when he was comfortable, the unfocused gaze of a man who is not looking at anything specific and is not required to be. She sat in his chair. She said nothing. He reported the trip. He said the weather had been clear the first day and overcast the second. He said the campsite had been dry. He said he had seen sign of deer, but not deer. These were all plausible and normal things to say about 2 nights in the Monongahela in October. He said the morning had been beautiful. She passed him the bread and noted the word. Hatch did not use beautiful to describe outdoor conditions. He used good. He used fine, occasionally. He used not bad with a particular intonation that meant better than expected. Beautiful was not in his working vocabulary for trail conditions. She had 19 years of trip reports to reference, and she could not locate beautiful in any of them. He said it again a few minutes later, describing the second morning's light. Beautiful morning. Really beautiful up there. She said, "That's nice." He asked about her mother. She set her fork down and looked at him. Her mother and Hatch had a relationship of mutual careful tolerance that had calcified over many years into a reliable and acknowledged fact of their marriage. Her mother did not fully approve of Hatch for reasons she had never completely articulated, and Hatch did not ask about her mother. And Geneva occupied the space between them with the practiced diplomacy of someone who has been doing it long enough to make it look easy. He knew this. He had always known this. Not asking about her mother was not an oversight or a lapse. It was a structural feature of their relationship, as established and reliable as which chair belonged to whom. He asked about her mother the way someone asks about a person they have remembered to ask about, because it is the kind of thing you ask about. Pleasantly, with the surface texture of genuine interest, with no awareness that the question had landed differently than intended. She said her mother was fine. She washed the dishes after dinner. He went to the living room and turned on the television to the channel he always turned it to, which was correct, and she could hear it from the kitchen, and it sounded like him, like his evening, like the ordinary texture of a Sunday when he had just come back from the annual trip. She washed the dishes and listened to it and told herself, 2 nights alone, high elevation, late October cold. The decompression after solitude sometimes produces behavioral drift. People come back from extended solo time slightly recalibrated, slightly outside their own habits, and it corrects within a day or two. She had read about this. It was a documented effect of wilderness solo time. She dried the dishes and put them away and went to the living room. He was in his chair. He had moved to his chair while she was in the kitchen, which she noted without relief, because noticing it as something to be relieved about meant she had been tracking it as an anomaly, which meant she was already keeping a list. She went to bed at 10. He said he would be up soon. She woke at 2:40 in the morning. The bed beside her was empty. She lay still for a moment, listening, and heard nothing from the bathroom. No water, no movement. She got up and went to the hallway. He was in the kitchen, standing at the window above the sink, looking out into the dark backyard. He was not doing anything. He was not getting water or checking the door or looking for something on the counter. He was standing at the window with his hands at his sides, looking out at the dark, with the specific stillness of a person who has been standing in one place for long enough that stillness has become the default state. She said his name. He did not respond. She crossed the kitchen and put her hand on his arm. He turned. There was a delay, not long, half a second, perhaps less, between the touch and the turning, and then between the turning and the expression, as if the expression had to be retrieved from somewhere slightly further away than expressions usually live. And then it was there. His face, his eyes, the slight unfocus of someone woken from a light sleep while standing, the familiar reassembling of a person returning to themselves. He said, "Couldn't sleep, just listening." She said, "What are you listening to?" He looked at the dark window. He said, "Nothing, I guess." He went back to bed. She stood in the kitchen for a moment and looked at the dark window above the sink, which showed her the kitchen reflected back at her, the counter, the cabinets, the overhead light she had turned on when she came in, and beyond all of that, black and complete, the backyard that backed up to the tree line at the property's edge. She turned off the light and went back to bed and lay in the dark and listened to him breathe beside her, which was the right rhythm, the right depth, the right sound. She lay there for a long time, not sleeping, listening to the right sound and trying to locate exactly what it was that had felt, for half a second in the kitchen, like the wrong face. In the morning, she found his trail journal on the kitchen table. She had not put it there. He must have left it when he came down in the night or before he came to bed, or she had missed it earlier in the evening. It was the same journal he had used for 5 years, a small hardcover with a dark green cover, its spine slightly warped from being carried in a pack pocket through varying weather. She opened it. The first 4 days were in his handwriting. She knew it as well as her own, had watched it for 19 years, knew its specific angle, and the way he formed his sevens and the slight hitch in his lowercase e. Notes on weather, mileage, campsite details, observations about trail conditions. Day 1, Day 2, Day 3, which was the day he hiked into the far campsite. Day 4, which was his main day at camp. Day 5, the day he hiked out. 1 line. In handwriting, that was almost his. The same angle, the same letter forms, the same slight hitch in the E, but slightly too neat. Too even. The way a signature looks when someone has practiced it rather than lived it. Good trip, same as always. She stood in the kitchen and looked at it. She thought about the left hand and the wrong chair, and Beautiful and her mother, and the half-second delay in the kitchen at 2:40 in the morning. And she thought about Hatch, who filled every previous day, 5 entry with 2 paragraphs at minimum and sometimes 3, who wrote about the morning light and the sound of the drainage and what his legs felt like on the climb out and what he was planning to eat when he got home, who had been writing in that journal for 5 years and whose longest single entry was 340 words, which she had read and remembered because it was the entry from the year his father had been sick and the trip had been harder than usual, and he had written about it with more openness than he typically allowed himself in speech. Good trip. Same as always. 4 words. In handwriting, that was almost right. She closed the journal. She put her hand flat on the cover and stood in the kitchen in the early morning light and listened to the house, which was quiet, and to the bedroom, where the right breathing was still happening at the right rhythm. And she made the specific face that people make when they have arrived at a question they are not yet ready to finish asking. She put the journal in her car. She did not tell him she had moved it. She put it in the bag she kept in the back seat for library returns. Canvas, unremarkable, the kind of bag that can sit in a car for weeks without anyone asking about it. And she zipped it closed and went back inside and made breakfast and sat across from him at the table and watched him eat with his right hand, which was correct, and listened to him talk about a route change he was considering for next year's trip, which was the kind of forward-looking trip planning he always did in the days after returning. And she said the things you say when someone is talking about plans, and she tracked every word for the specific quality she had noticed in the kitchen at 240, which was the quality of things being retrieved rather than produced. She was not certain she found it. That was the honest accounting. Some moments it was there, a pause before a phrase, a word choice that was adjacent to his word choice but not exactly his, and other moments he was simply Hatch across the breakfast table, drinking coffee correctly, from the right hand in his own chair, talking about a trail. She started the list that afternoon on her phone, in the Notes app. In a note she titled Library Holds, so that if he looked over her shoulder it would appear to be what it was not. Left hand, first evening. Her chair, first evening. Beautiful, twice. Her mother, 2:40 a.m. kitchen window. Day 5, journal entry, 4 words. She added to it over the following days. There were not many additions, there were enough. He said the word lovely once, describing the drive home from the trailhead, which was not a word she had heard him use in 22 years of knowing him. Not impossible. People used words they didn't typically use, especially when they were describing something they wanted to convey with more precision than their standard vocabulary allowed. She noted it. He forgot the name of their neighbor's dog. This was a dog he had been on nodding terms with for 6 years. A large orange hound named Biscuit, who had barked at his truck every time he pulled in for 6 years, whose name he had used in conversation perhaps dozens of times. He referred to the dog as the neighbor's dog, twice in 2 separate conversations, without producing the name. She called Arlo on a Thursday evening when Hatch was at the hardware store. Arlo had known Hatch since they were 19 years old, which was longer than Geneva had known him, and she trusted Arlo's knowledge of Hatch the way she trusted old topographical maps. Accumulated, specific, based on direct experience over a long period of terrain. She asked Arlo if he would have coffee with Hatch, just have coffee, just talk. She said she thought Hatch might need some normal social contact after the solo trip. She did not say more. Arlo called her 2 days later. He said Hatch had seemed fine. He said they had talked about the hardware store project and the upcoming deer season and a mutual friend's recent move. He said Hatch had seemed a little quieter than usual, but that was not uncommon after the annual trip. Hatch always took a few days to shift back into social register. Arlo had noticed it before. Then Arlo said, "He didn't ask about Chester." Geneva held the phone. Chester was Arlo's dog, a 7-year-old beagle with a torn ear from a fence incident the previous spring. Hatch asked about Chester every time he saw Arlo, had asked about Chester through Chester's puppyhood and adolescence, and into the reliable middle years of Chester's life, had tracked Chester's ear injury and recovery with what Geneva had always found to be a slightly disproportionate investment of concern, had asked about Chester first, before any other topic every single time. It was the first thing. It had always been the first thing. Arlo said he didn't mention him once. I thought maybe Chester had, I don't know. I thought something had happened that I didn't know about. But when I got home, Chester was right there. Geneva said, he's probably just tired. Arlo said, yeah, probably. She called the permit office the following week. She had his permit number from the confirmation email he had forwarded her before the trip, as he always did in case of emergency, and she used it to inquire about entry and exit records, explaining that she was confirming the dates for an insurance matter, which was a lie that was small enough to tell without significant difficulty. Entry confirmed. Exit confirmed. Sign out at the trailhead box at 2:14 p.m. on Sunday, the day he came home. The times matched. He had been there. He had signed out. The ranger she spoke to mentioned in the offhand way of someone sharing a minor administrative footnote that the trail counter at mile 4 had recorded 2 separate outbound passes that Sunday afternoon. One at 1:32 p.m., one at 2:44 p.m. The counter was a passive infrared device set at trail level, standard equipment, not prone to error under normal conditions. She thanked the ranger and ended the call. Hatch would have passed that counter once on his way out. One pass. One body moving outbound on a closed afternoon. The counter had recorded 2. She sat with that for a while. There were explanations. Counter malfunction, wildlife triggering the sensor, a hiker who had accessed the trail without a permit. Any number of possibilities that had nothing to do with what her list in the Notes app was accumulating toward. She acknowledged each explanation and held it and set it aside, and sat with what remained when the explanations were held at arm's length and the data was simply the data. 2 weeks after his return, she asked him in the evening, casually, about the last morning at camp. She said she had been thinking about the trip and had meant to ask, what was the view like from the ridge on the last morning, the morning he hiked out? She said she had always wondered what it looked like up there in the early light. He described it. He took his time with it, which was itself a slight variation. Hatch typically described outdoor conditions efficiently, with the minimum language required to convey the relevant facts. He took his time with this, and used words like glowing and still, and described the fog in the valley below the ridge and the way the light came across the far slope and the sound of the creek in the drainage below. She kept her face pleasant and attentive. The campsite did not have a view of the creek drainage. She knew this because she had looked at photographs of it. He had shown her photographs over the years. The campsite itself, the ridge view, the descent route. The campsite sat in a saddle on the ridge with sight lines to the east and west, but not to the north where the drainage ran. A ridge blind, a natural one created by the topography, cut the campsite off from any view or sound of the creek below. She had looked at those photographs enough times to know this, the way she knew the arrangement of their kitchen. He described hearing the creek. She said, "That sounds beautiful." He said, "It really was." She went to the kitchen for water she did not need, and stood at the sink and looked out the dark window at the backyard and the tree line beyond it, and breathed through her nose the way she coached anxious students to breathe in her library when the pressure of a thing became more than their bodies could hold quietly. She went to the car the following morning and opened the canvas bag and took out the journal and photographed the Day 5 entry in the good natural light coming through the windshield. Then she photographed the Day 4 entry, the Day 3 entry, the Day 2 entry, the Day 1 entry. She held them side by side on her phone and looked at the handwriting across all 5 days and found what she had known she would find, which was that the difference was visible if you were looking for it, and looking for it had become unavoidable. She put the journal back in the bag. She went inside and made coffee and sat at the table and watched him come downstairs in the particular way he came downstairs, which was correct in all its details. Every detail, the hand on the rail, and the slight pause at the bottom and the direction he turned toward the kitchen. All correct. All exactly as they had always been. She handed him his coffee. He took it with his right hand. He said good morning in his voice, the right voice, the voice she had been listening to for 19 years. She thought about the creek he had heard from a ridge where the creek could not be heard. She thought about a trail counter recording 2 outbound passes on a Sunday afternoon when one person had signed out. She thought about the spruce needle she had found 3 weeks later, cleaning out the outer pocket of his pack before putting it in storage. A single spruce needle, dry and dark green. She had looked up the tree composition of the Monongahela section where he camped, the specific elevation and aspect, and the dominant species were red oak, sugar maple, black cherry, yellow birch, and hemlock. No spruce at that elevation, in that section, in that aspect. She had checked twice. She had put the needle in a small plastic bag and put it in the canvas bag with the journal, and put the canvas bag back in her car. She had not shown it to him. She was not certain that showing it to him would produce the right response, and she was not certain that the right response was something she was prepared to receive. He was at the table across from her, drinking coffee, talking about the hardware store project, filling the morning with the ordinary texture of a person who lived here, who had always lived here, who would continue to live here. His hands were right, his voice was right. His face, in the morning light, was the face she had been looking at for 19 years. There were things that were right and things that were wrong, and she was the only person who knew both lists completely, and she sat across from him and held both lists and did not speak about either one, and drank her coffee while he talked. The canvas bag was in her car. It would still be there tomorrow. It would still be there next week, and the week after that. And in October, when he started shaking out the gear and repacking it with the list from the notebook in the top dresser drawer, getting ready for the annual trip, looking forward to it with the particular, forward-leaning energy he always brought to the planning. She had not told him she was not sure it was him. She was not sure that was something you said. She was not sure it would help. She was not sure what help would look like, or who she would ask for it, or what words she would use to describe the shape of what she was holding to someone who had not been inside these weeks with her, had not kept the list, had not stood in the kitchen at 2:40 in the morning, and felt a half-second delay between a touch and a face. Across the table, he laughed at something he had said himself, the way he sometimes did, and the laugh was right, and she smiled because the smile was what came next. And outside the kitchen window, the tree line at the back of the property stood bare and still in the October light. And the annual trip was 11 months away, and she had 11 months to decide what she knew and what she was going to do with knowing it. She hadn't decided yet,